Chapter 5467. A Genius in a Second to Remember. Love, go away. The internet provides you with exciting novels to read. Lin E had been trying to figure out how to use the consciousness vortex. Although he hadn't completed it yet, he had some ideas, so he decided to use this giant crab as practice. An invisible consciousness vortex appeared on top of the crab's head. The size of this consciousness vortex was quite exquisite. It was about 1/5 the size of Tai Shi's consciousness vortex. Lin E wasn't disappointed. It was good enough that it could reach this level. He was already prepared that he wouldn't be able to activate it. Now that he saw the exquisite consciousness vortex, he felt a little proud. The giant crab's physical defense was definitely strong, but its primordial spirit was just SOSO. The consciousness vortex that Lin E had created was probably useless against Bing Wuching, but it worked surprisingly well on the giant crab's head. Gah, what's this? You're making Uncle Crab dizzy. The giant crab's two eyes moved left and right a few times. Even its huge body started to shake. The consciousness vortex tugged at the giant crab's primordial spirit a few times. Although it didn't pull it out, it still shook it. Lin E smiled and encouraged Bing Wuching. This idiot's silly bubbles have exploded. Little Bing Bing, hurry up and beat him up. After Lin Yi's attack was effective, he did not continue to attack. Instead, he gave the opportunity to Bing Wuching. The only thing he could do was to protect Bing Wuching and weaken the opponent's strength to a level that Bing Wuching could handle. Bing Wuching was speechless. Little Bing Bing, what the hell? Although you're my boss, you can't attack me personally, can you? However, Bing Wuching really didn't have time to complain. Because of the shaking of the primordial spirit, the giant crab's bubbles lost control for a moment, and then they exploded. Bing Wuching, who had been surrounded by the bubbles, suddenly jumped up. Black icicles, driven by vital energy consumption, stabbed at the giant crab's two eyes like lightning. Despicable human, do you think you can sneak up on Uncle Crab like this? Too naive, don't look down on me. The crab had recovered slightly and noticed Bing Wuching's sneak attack. It roared loudly and swung its huge crab claw. Sure enough, if you spit out too many bubbles, you will also become a silly bubble. Lin E sighed and threw out another spiritual consciousness vortex. He clearly knew that it was Lin E who had knocked him out, but he had still only paid attention to Bing Wuching. This crab's intelligence was indeed a sore point. The damage caused by Lin Yi's spiritual vortex, which he was not familiar with, was basically negligible. However, it was quite good for restraining, especially against sea beasts like the sea crab that had weak primordial spirit defenses. After taking another hit from the consciousness whirlpool, the crab's primordial spirit trembled again as expected. Bing Wuching's attack, which was used to defend and counterattack at the same time, came to a halt. The slightest difference could lead to a great difference. Bing Wuching did not encounter any resistance, and the black icicles successfully pierced the crab's eye. Ah, despicable human, you only know how to sneak attack your master crab. Just you wait for Master Crab. The crab roared and turned to retreat into the sea, intending to escape. To be honest, the crab was really panicking now. Being blinded by the icicle was not a big deal. At his level, he could still use some heaven and earth treasures to recover. The problem was that the seemingly weak human was knocking him out again and again. If this went on, he probably wouldn't have the chance to use any heaven and earth treasures. Lin Yu might have foolishly mocked the crab, but the crab was definitely not stupid. In a life and death situation, he had to run if he could. As for whether he could escape, that was another matter entirely. Lin E threw another spiritual consciousness vortex over to interrupt the crab's escape. He turned to Bing Wuching and said, "Little Bing Bing, I'll leave this silly bubble to you. Don't hold back. Make a seafood feast." Bing Wuching nodded with a cold expression. She was seriously considering whether she should change her surname. Little Bing Bing was too mushy. She did not know why Big Boss suddenly started giving people nicknames after meeting the Island Lord of Spirit Snake Island alone. Lin Yi was secretly laughing at this moment. Of course, he had called her Little Bing Bing on purpose. He was just venting his displeasure at being called a grandpa. It was only natural for him to call his little brother Little Bing Bing. With endless resentment for being called Little Bing Bing, Bing Wuching instantly appeared behind the crab and thrust her black icicle with all her might. Ah, wow! The blind crab screamed loudly. Lin Yi could not bear to look at it. Puffed. Little Bing Bing, you're too dirty. You actually went and pierced someone's anus. The corner of Bing Wuching's mouth twitched. In a barely audible voice, she said, I really didn't do it on purpose. The blind crab, whose anus had been pierced, was completely enraged. It flailed its 8 long legs in a frenzy, then desperately fled into the sea. This time, Lin Yi did not continue using the spiritual consciousness vortex. Although it was getting easier and easier to use, Lin Yi still gave the opportunity to Bing Wuching. Merciless ice force. The next moment, a huge chill enveloped the crab's huge body. The pressure did not have much effect on it before, but it was obviously different this time. After Bing Wuching unleashed the merciless ice force, the crab's huge body was forcefully pressed down. At the same time, a layer of frost rapidly formed on its surface. The corner of Lin Yi's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. Bing Wuching was indeed a cultivation genius. She had actually improved the merciless ice force in the midst of battle. Within the merciless ice force, tiny black ice crystals were faintly floating in the air. It was precisely these tiny black ice crystals that caused the power of the merciless ice force to undergo an earth-shattering change. Geniuses indeed needed to grow through battle. At this point, Lin Yi knew that he no longer needed to interfere. With Bing Wuching's current merciless ice force, even the crab at its peak might not be a match for Bing Wuching, let alone the blind crab whose anus had been pierced. A moment later, Bing Wuching finally finished off the giant crab. She had also completely exhausted all her vital energy. She lay limply on the ground, not wanting to move. Lin Yi came to Bing Wuching's side, took out a few pieces of supreme-grade spirit jades, and said, recover for a while and recall the details of the battle at the same time. This is a rare and precious experience. Yes. Bing Wuching quickly sat up, took the spirit jades, and said gratefully, thank you, Big Boss Lin Yi. Don't stand on ceremony with me. Lin Yi waved his hand and said, you know my personality. I won't mistreat those who are loyal to me. All right, I'll stand guard for you. The second season of the web drama School Bell is airing on iQIYI. Everyone can watch it now. Please add the Fishman's official QQ account, Fishman2, and his official WeChat account, Urine22. All the latest news, autograph books, and events are being delivered nonstop. Chapter 5468. A genius in a second to remember love/go away, to provide you with exciting novels to read. Okay. Bing Wuching didn't argue. After sitting down cross-legged, she suddenly thought of something and said hesitantly, well, Boss Lin Yi, can you not call me Little Bing Bing in the future? Lin Yi broke into laughter, thinking that someone finally understood how he felt when he was called an old man. He waved his hand generously and said, no problem. I won't call you that in the future. Bing Wuching closed her eyes in relief and prepared to cultivate and recover. However, Lin Yi's next sentence almost drove her crazy. Then how about calling you Deepwell Bing? What the hell? Bing Wuching was a little confused. Boss Lin Yi was a decent person before. Why did he suddenly become like this? What kind of stimulation did he receive? Bing Wuching would never know that it was because Marquis Yu had called Lin Yi an old man that Lin Yi had shifted his resentment onto him. Of course, it was also because Lin Yi was a little happy after obtaining the 20-god knowledge fruits. The tumor in his body could probably be removed, so he joked a little more. Seeing that Bing Wuching had entered a state of cultivation, Chu Tianlu walked over and greeted Lin Yi. "Senior Lin, thank you for saving me again. This sea crab is full of treasures. Why don't you let me help you, and Senior Bing clean it up first?" Lin Yi glanced at Chu Tianlu and nodded. "All right, I'll have to trouble you then. Tell me what treasures are on this sea crab." When he was on Heaven Level Island, the sea beasts in the endless sea had never been conquered. Lin Yi had only fought them a few times and didn't know much about them. Even an old captain like Okuda Dam knew very little about sea beasts. But now it seemed that the sea beasts in the ancient underworld weren't particularly strong, so Lin Yi was naturally interested. "It's no trouble at all. It's what I should do." Chu Tianlu laughed modestly, then immediately introduced, "This sea crab's carapace is extremely hard, a good material for forging armor, while its toes are good materials for forging weapons. The most valuable thing is his inner core. The inner core of an early-stage, nascent soul, realm sea beast, is a priceless treasure." When the value of sea beasts' inner cores was mentioned, Chu Tianlu's face immediately became radiant. The inner cores of sea beasts, in the initial stage of the nascent soul stage, are the main ingredients for refining nascent soul golden cores. Only experts like Senior Lin and Senior Bing can easily deal with nascent soul stage sea beasts. Normally, even if there were a few more nascent soul old monsters, they might not be able to do it. Every nascent soul old monster was the cornerstone of each sect. Even if they knew that the inner core of the sea beast was precious, they wouldn't dare to touch it easily. If something happened to them, the sect behind them would be finished. This could be seen from the Thousand Blades sect's fate after Primordial Invincible left. "Oh, you said that the inner core of sea beasts can be used to refine nascent soul golden cores." Lin Yi was quite surprised. All along, he thought that nascent ginseng was indispensable for refining nascent soul golden cores, but now that he heard that the inner core of nascent soul stage sea beasts could also be used to refine nascent soul golden cores, he immediately became very interested. After all, nascent ginseng was rare, and sea beasts were easy to come by. For Lin Yi, even if he already had a whole nascent ginseng, there would always be a time when it was used up, but in the endless ocean, sea beasts wouldn't all die. Chu Tianlu nodded. "The inner cores of sea beasts are used to refine pills. Senior Lin, you're not an alchemist, so perhaps you're not very clear about this. For example, foundation building pills, golden cores, and so on are all refined from the inner cores of corresponding foundation building and golden core sea beasts. It's just that sea beasts aren't easy to catch, so there aren't many pills circulating in the world." "Oh," Lin Yi smiled faintly. He didn't say that the pills he refined were much more than what Chu Tianlu had seen. Instead, he asked, "It's not easy to catch sea beasts of golden core and nascent soul stage, but is it also not easy to catch sea beasts of foundation building stage?" "Foundation building stage is easy to catch, but there are too few sea beasts of foundation building stage." Chu Tianlu shook his head with a bitter smile and explained, "All the sea beasts in the coastal sea are basically below foundation building stage. Even if you catch them, it won't be of much use. In the deep sea, there are sea beasts of foundation building stage, but they are all young sea beasts. If you want to catch them, you have to face powerful adult sea beasts. It's almost the same as catching sea beasts of golden core and nascent soul stage." "So that's how it is." Lin Yi nodded and didn't take it to heart. With his strength, whether it was his original body or his primordial spirit, it was relatively easy to catch sea beasts of nascent soul stage. He just didn't know if the inner cores of sea beasts of profound ascension stage were the same. However, it was probably very difficult to find sea beasts of profound ascension stage in the small Jianghu. He would think about it when he returned to the heavenly island. You seem to understand the inner cores of sea beasts quite well. Are you an alchemist? Linny asked casually. Since he knew that the inner cores of sea beasts could be used for alchemy, he had to find a way to get the pill recipe and try it out. If Chu Tianlu had the pill recipe, Lin Yi wouldn't mind exchanging some things for it. Unfortunately, Chu Tianlu shook his head regretfully and said, "Junior's aptitude is mediocre. I don't have the talent to be an alchemist at all." Speaking up to this point, Chu Tianlu showed a bashful expression on his face and said hesitantly, "Senior Lin, Junior has a presumptuous request. I wonder if Senior Lin can sell this crab's inner core to Junior for a price." "You want this inner core?" Lin Yi looked at Chu Tianlu amusedly. This guy was really an honest person. He clearly wanted this inner core, but he first praised it. Was he afraid that others wouldn't raise the price? Chu Tianlu's face was slightly red, and he said very embarrassedly, "Junior knows that the inner core of a nascent soul stage sea beast is extremely precious, but Junior's grandfather's birthday is coming soon. If I can get the inner core of a nascent soul stage sea beast and give it to Junior's grandfather, it can help him advance to the peak of the early nascent soul stage." After a slight pause, Chu Tianlu added, "Senior Lin, what price do you want? As long as you can transfer this inner core to Junior, Junior will definitely find a way to do it. If you get this inner core, can you refine it into a nascent soul golden core? Or do you have the pill recipe for a nascent soul golden core?" Lin Yi didn't care much about this sea beast's inner core. It didn't matter even if he gave it to Chu Tianlu. After all, if Chu Tianlu hadn't been so honest, Lin Yi wouldn't have been able to obtain the 20 divine knowledge fruits. At worst, he could just catch another sea beast when he wanted to experiment with alchemy. What was important now was the pill recipe for using the sea beast's inner core to refine pills. Chu Tianlu hesitated, then said, "If it's refining pills with Junior's family connections, there shouldn't be a problem. As for the pill recipe, Tianliang is an alchemist. He might have the pill recipe for a nascent soul golden core." Chapter 5469. Genius 1 Second. Remember, if you want to go, TalkNet, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Lin Yi recalled that Chu Tianliang knew how to use the pill firebomb. He was indeed a pill refiner, but was that guy already dead? If you can give me some recipes for refining a sea beast's inner core, I'll give this inner core to you. Lin Yi didn't beat around the bush and directly threw out his conditions. After all, this thing was dispensable to Lin Yi, and Chu Tianlu wasn't suited to beating around the bush. Love, go, little talk. Chu Tianlu was a straightforward person, but he wasn't really stupid. He immediately reacted and asked in surprise, "Senior Lin, you're a pill refiner?" "Sort of." Linny smiled faintly. "Maybe a little better than Chu Tianliang." Chu Tianlu was immediately overjoyed, but also somewhat bewildered. He didn't know how to react for a moment. "Does your clan have a recipe for this type of pill?" Lin Yi thought that the matter of Duan Muyu's marriage had to be resolved sooner or later. It just so happened that he had this excuse. He'd conveniently go to the Chu clan and help Duan Muyu get rid of this trouble. There should be. Chu Tianlu was indeed a straightforward guy. Even now, he didn't say anything definite. "Even if there isn't with our clan's connections, we can quickly find a recipe." Love, go, little talk. Neku. In fact, Chu Tianlu also knew that using an affirmative answer to befriend Lin Yi was the best. Just as he said, even if the Chu clan didn't have a recipe with their clan's strength, it wouldn't be difficult for them to acquire one. These details could be completely omitted from Lin Yi, But Chu Tianlu didn't like to lie, so he told the truth. Senior Lin, since you need a recipe, why don't you come with me to my clan? I believe my grandfather will be very happy to get to know you, Senior Lin. Chu Tianlu sincerely extended an invitation. Linny nodded. That's fine. Your grandfather's birthday is just around the corner. I'll go and congratulate him. That's great. To be able to receive Senior Lin's presents. Our Chu family is greatly honored by your presence. Chu Tianlu rubbed his hands excitedly. To be able to have a good relationship with Lin Yi, no matter if it was for the Chu family or for Chu Tianlu himself, it was extremely important. As for Lin Yi's intention to ruin the marriage alliance between Duanmu Yu and the Chu clan, Chu Tianlu didn't know about it. Even if he did, it wouldn't matter. He had no interest in the marriage alliance to begin with. If he knew that Duanmu Yu was related to Lin Yi, he would definitely ask his clan to terminate the marriage alliance with the Yiling sect. Senior Lin, please take a rest first. I'll go get rid of this crab. We'll set off once Senior Bing recovers. Chu Tianlu bowed, slightly. After waiting for Lin Yi to nod in agreement, he quickly took out a short knife and went to deal with the sea crabs. It could be seen that Chu Tianlu had a certain amount of experience in dealing with the carcasses of sea beasts. Although the shell of the sea crabs was quite hard, Chu Tianlu's short knife penetrated deep into the seams of the crab's body. Then he followed the lines and dissected the crab's shell. His movements were quite smooth. After more than 10 minutes, Chu Tianlu had dissected the shell of the sea crabs. Together with the claws, they piled up into a small hill as tall as 2 people. Senior Lin, this is the inner core of the sea crabs. Please keep it well. Chu Tianlu held a water blue inner core, the size of 2 fists, in his hands, and ran over to present it to Lin Yi. Although this was what Chu Tianlu wanted, he didn't covet it at all. He looked very natural. Lin Yi casually took the inner core of the sea crabs and sensed the pure waves of spiritual power within it. He smiled faintly and said, "Thank you for your hard work." At this moment, Bing Wuqing finished her cultivation. She suddenly stood up and said excitedly, "Big brother, I've recovered, and I seem to have stabilized my strength. Just in time. We can set off now." Lin Yi nodded in satisfaction. He could feel that Bing Wuqing's aura had become much more solid. Although she hadn't broken through, she had definitely improved a lot compared to before. By the way, why don't you give this inner core of the sea crabs to me? I'll give you some other benefits later. In name, the sea crabs were killed by Bing Wuqing. Lin Yi didn't want to put on a domineering attitude in front of his underlings, so he asked for her opinion. "Big brother Lin Yi, what are you talking about?" Bing Wuqing immediately said solemnly, "If you hadn't helped me in time, I would have been killed by this sea crab. Everything I have was given to me by you, Bing Wuqing. Even if I was the one who killed this sea crab, everything still belongs to you, boss. Needless to say, you were the one who killed this sea crab. So all the credit goes to you, boss." Hearing that Bing Wuqing, a nascent soul realm old monster, was so obedient to Lin Yi, Chu Tianlu was instantly moved. He was even more determined to befriend Lin Yi. Lin Yi didn't stand on ceremony anymore. He nodded and smiled. "All right, you've been so cold before, but you're so talkative today. In any case, I won't mistreat my own people. Let's pack up and make a trip to the Chu clan." In fact, with Bing Wuqing's current status, it wasn't a problem at all for her to purchase a few elixir recipes. But since Lin Yi had said so, she naturally wouldn't object. As long as it was Lin Yi's decision, she would carry it out completely. The sea crab's inner core was secretly kept in the space in the jade pendant by Lin Yi. However, the outer shell and the toes were not very convenient. After all, Chu Tianlu wasn't someone Lin Yi could trust completely. Not to mention that this fellow was an honest person. There was no telling when he might expose Lin Yi's secret. Fortunately, Lin Yi's flying spiritual beast was still hovering in the air. Chu Tianlu packed up the spoils of war and placed them on his own flying spiritual beast. He let Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing ride on Lin Yi's flying spiritual beast, while he led the way on his own flying spiritual beast. After setting off, Bing Wuqing regained her usual cold expression. She had always been a cold person, so she couldn't find any topics to talk about. She could only stay behind Lin Yi and continue to reminisce about the previous battle experience. For hours later, the two flying spiritual beasts arrived at a stretch of hills. The Chu clan was located in the middle of these hills. Before the old master of the Chu clan broke through to the nascent soul stage, the Chu clan was just an insignificant clan. Now that there was a nascent soul old monster holding the fort, their social status immediately changed. That was why they wanted to form a marriage alliance with the Yiling sect, hoping to advance further and enter the ranks of the 10 small sects and clans. Chu Tianlu, who was in front, slowed down and came to the side of Lin Yi's flying spiritual beast. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior Lin, our Chu clan is right in front. I have already sent a message saying that a distinguished guest will be visiting. I believe that my family will be very happy to welcome Senior Lin." However, Lin Yi didn't feel that the Chu clan was very welcoming of him. When he and Bing Wuqing followed Chu Tianlu into the Chu clan's main gate, no one came to welcome the distinguished guest that Chu Tianlu had mentioned. Not only that, even the people who opened the door had a cold expression on their faces. The second season of the online drama, School Bell, is airing on iQIYI. Everyone can go and watch it now. Please add the Fishman's official QQ account, Fishman2, and WeChat official Urine22. All kinds of latest news, autograph books, and activities are constantly being sent. Chapter 5470. It seems that you, the young master of the Chu clan, aren't doing very well. Lin Yi looked at Chu Tianlu with a strange expression. He originally thought that Chu Tianlu's position in the Chu clan was at least slightly higher than Chu Tianliang's. Otherwise, Chu Tianliang wouldn't want to deal with Chu Tianlu. However, the current situation was that Chu Tianlu couldn't even obtain the respect of a disciple. As the dignified young master of the Chu clan's direct line of descent, he was truly speechless. Chu Tianlu smiled awkwardly. This disciple belonged to Chu Tianliang's father's faction, so it was normal that they didn't care about Chu Tianlu. As for the information that was sent back before, it was probably intercepted by them. Although Chu Tianlu understood, he didn't explain anything to Lin Yi. After all, he was an honest person. Following the principle of not airing family shame in public, he forced a smile and led Lin Yi in. "Senior Lin, please forgive me. My grandfather is probably in closed-door training, so he didn't receive this junior's message. I've neglected you." Chu Tianlu apologized, thinking that it was good to see his grandfather. Not to mention Lin Yi's strength, just his identity as an alchemist who could refine nascent soul golden pills was a top-notch existence in the small Jianghu. It was enough to be on equal footing with the core members of the 4 great sects and 10 small clans. Chu Tianlu concluded that it was impossible for his grandfather to ignore Lin Yi's arrival. "It's fine." Lin Yi waved his hand indifferently. At his level, he wouldn't care about small things at all. Moreover, his main purpose of coming here was to make the Chu clan take the initiative to break off the engagement, so that the Yiling sect wouldn't be put in a difficult position. If he really received a warm welcome, he really wouldn't be able to open his mouth when the time came. If that idiot Chu Tianliang came back, he might be able to stir up some trouble and give Lin Yi more excuses. If he had known earlier, he would have pulled Chu Tianliang along. Just as Lin Yi was feeling regretful in his heart, he discovered through his divine sense that there were more than 10 golden core cultivators standing in a courtyard not far away. All of them looked unfriendly, and their target seemed to be Lin Yi's group of 3. Were they trying to stir up trouble? Lin Yi was not surprised, but happy. Someone sent him a pillow, just when he was dozing off. Immediately, he secretly transmitted his vital energy to Bing Wuqing. Wuqing, if anything happens later, don't do anything. Don't do anything for the time being, without my orders. Bing Wuqing nodded without hesitation. As for the reason, Lin Yi's words were the reason. As long as they executed it accurately, it would be fine. As for the others who saw him nod, it didn't matter. They didn't know what it meant anyway. After a dozen steps, they passed through the eaves and entered the courtyard in front of the hall. It was the place where Lin Yi's divine sense had found someone. Chu Tianlu raised his eyes and saw the dozen or so golden core clansmen in the courtyard. He was slightly startled, wondering if they were here to welcome Senior Lin. Even though they didn't greet him directly at the main entrance, this was still a grand lineup. Almost 90% of the Chu clan's upper echelons were present. Second uncle, did you receive my message and come to welcome the honored guest? A smile appeared on Chu Tianlu's face. He quickened his steps and saluted the middle-aged man in the middle. This sinister-looking middle-aged man was Chu Tianliang's father. He was in charge of the Chu clan's finances and cultivation resources, and he was Chu Hongding. Chu Tianlu was about to introduce these clansmen to Lin Yi and let Chu Hongding know Lin Yi's identity and strength, but he was interrupted by Chu Hongding. What honored guest? These 2 juniors? Chu Hongding snorted coldly and glanced disdainfully at Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. He couldn't see through Bing Wuqing's cultivation, but Lin Yi's strength was clearly displayed. He was only a consummate foundation building. Bing Wuqing was half a step behind Lin Yi and was following beside him. It was obvious that she wasn't as powerful as Lin Yi. No matter how powerful she was only slightly more powerful than Lin Yi. She wasn't worth his attention at all. It was Chu Tianlu's fault. His previous message simply said that there were honored guests coming and that the clan should prepare a grand welcoming ceremony. He didn't even mention Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing's identities and strength. Otherwise, Bing Wuqing's identity alone would be enough for the Chu clan to prepare a welcoming ceremony of the highest standard. Second uncle, you didn't know? Chu Tianlu hurriedly tried to explain. Even though Chu Hongding's faction didn't like him, Chu Tianlu was an honest man. He still thought about the Chu clan's overall situation. Unfortunately, Chu Hongding didn't want to listen to Chu Tianlu at all. He continued to snort coldly and interrupted. I didn't know you were so daring. Speak. Where's your conscience? Also, why did Wenshang and Xingping's soul jade tablets shatter? Did you collude with outsiders and plot against them? This was truly a case of, if you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. Only then did Lin Yi realize that Chu Hongding had been waiting for Chu Tianlu. However, it was no wonder. Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang had left together. Chu Wenshang and Chu Xingping were Chu Tianliang's people. Chu Tianliang also had the offensive and defensive treasures that Chu Hongding had secretly given him. No matter how one looked at it, Chu Tianlu should have died in the Tai Shi Island trial. However, the one who had returned was Chu Tianlu. Chu Tianliang's whereabouts were unknown, and Chu Wenshang and Chu Xingping were confirmed dead. Even if it wasn't Chu Hongding who was bent on finding fault with them, any higher-ups in the Chu clan would probably look for Chu Tianlu at the first opportunity to find out the truth. Of course, if it was someone else, they would at least give Chu Tianlu a chance to speak. They definitely wouldn't be like Chu Hongding, who directly accused Chu Tianlu. Just as Chu Tianlu was about to speak, Chu Hongding waved his hand, and said resolutely, "Forget it. I reckon you won't tell the truth. Anyway, guards, lock up this traitor and his two companions first. Then, interrogate them carefully. I don't believe that you won't speak." Chu Tianlu didn't even allow him to speak. How did it become that he wouldn't speak? Lin Yi admired Chu Hengding's way of doing things. He was clearly bullying honest people. Only Chu Tianlu would do this. If Lin Yi was in Chu Tianlu's position, he would have killed him with a single slap. After Chu Hengding finished speaking, the two Chu clan members at the peak of the early gold core stage immediately unleashed their auras to the fullest. They fiercely pressed down on Chu Tianlu, Lin Yi, and Bing Wuqing. Bing Wuqing, who had received Lin Yi's warning, naturally didn't make any strange movements. Otherwise, if the Chu clan found out that she was using the aura of a gold core cultivator to deal with a nascent soul cultivator, they would probably just slit their own throats. Wouldn't that be a less painful death? Chu Tianlu wanted to remind his clansmen that of the two people who had come today, one was a genuine nascent soul cultivator, and the other was a ruthless person who could easily crush a nascent soul cultivator. They should never offend them. Unfortunately, under the pressure of two gold core cultivators at the peak of the early gold core stage, he couldn't even open his mouth. Of course, Chu Hengding wouldn't let Chu Tianlu speak. Not all of the Chu clan higher-ups present were on Chu Hengding's side. At least half of them were neutral, although he didn't know what had happened to Chu Tianliang. Since Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianlu were both dead, it was very likely that the Chu clan's treasure he had secretly given to Chu Tianliang had already been exposed to Chu Tianlu. Chapter 5471. A Genius in a Second. Remember love. We provide you with exciting novels to read. No matter what, this matter could not be made known to the neutral higher-ups. Thus, Chu Hengding had already instructed them not to give Chu Tianlu a chance to speak. Tianlu, don't resist anymore. Otherwise, you'll really be labeled a traitor. Be a good boy and come with us to the discipline hall. One of the two peak early golden core experts advised him coldly. Of course, this was just a formality. Whether Chu Tianlu resisted or not made no difference in their eyes. When Chu Tianlu saw that Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing didn't make a move to save him from his predicament, he didn't feel disappointed at all. Instead, he felt very fortunate. Otherwise, if the two of them were to fall out with each other, it would be enough to destroy the entire Chu clan. Lin Yi transmitted his voice to Chu Tianlu and Bing Wuqing without batting an eyelid. Listen to them. Let's go and see what they're up to. The current situation was still not enough for the Chu clan to voluntarily annul the marriage with the Yiling sect. Of course, Lin Yi could use his own strength and influence to intimidate the Chu clan, but that would be disadvantageous. After all, Lin Yi was in the wrong here. As long as no one provoked him, he was usually very reasonable. Of course, if others directly came knocking on his door, then Lin Yi would have nothing to worry about. Hearing Lin Yi's telepathic transmission, the two of them cooperated and allowed the two golden core experts of the Chu clan to place a restriction on their bodies that sealed their powers. Of course, such a restriction would only be effective on cultivators below the golden core stage. Bing Wuqing and Lin Yi, who were in the form of their primordial spirits, simply ignored it. Seeing that Chu Tianlu was easily restrained, Chu Hengding visibly relaxed. At the same time, a trace of ruthlessness flashed across his eyes. Whether Chu Tianliang was dead or alive, he would take this opportunity to kill Chu Tianlu. Lin Yi and the other two were escorted to the discipline hall by the two peak early golden core experts. It was actually just a small courtyard in a corner, but there was a dungeon underneath it. It was large enough to imprison cultivators, including those at the golden core stage. The two members of the Chu clan imprisoned Lin Yi and the other two in 3 separate cells. Then, Without saying a word, they left the prison with cold faces. With a wave of his hand, Lin Yi used his zhenqi to clear a clean area on the ground. Then, he casually sat down cross-legged. Chu Tianlu, who was next door, approached. Ashamed, he said to Lin Yi, "Senior Lin, I truly am sorry. It was because of this junior's matters that I implicated you." Lin Yi waved his hand indifferently and said, "It doesn't matter. Besides, I also know what's going on with Chu Tianliang and his two accomplices. Don't worry, when your family comes to interrogate you, I'll testify for you." "Thank you, Senior Lin." Chu Tianlu expressed his gratitude very sincerely. However, Lin Yi could sense that he was not thanking Lin Yi for testifying for him, but for not attacking the Chu clan with Bing Wuqing. If it were any other nascent soul old monster, it would be impossible for them to endure such treatment from the Chu clan. However, Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing had cooperated with the Chu clan without saying a word. For Chu Tianlu, who placed the Chu clan above all else, he was naturally grateful. "Don't mention it. The people who will interrogate you are already here." Lin erased his eyebrows. His divine sense had already sensed that Chu Hongding and the other two members of the Chu clan were entering the dungeon. The only difference from before was that Chu Hongding did not walk in the center this time. The one in the center was a man who was slightly older than him. It seemed that his status was higher than Chu Hongding's. When Chu Tianlu heard Lin Yi's words, he turned his head in shock. However, he did not see anyone enter the dungeon. It was clear that in terms of divine sense, Chu Tianlu was worlds apart from Lin Yi. After a while, Chu Hongding and the other two followed the winding staircase and arrived at the dungeon where Chu Tianlu and the others were imprisoned. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing did not move. They treated the three of them as air. Only Chu Tianlu quickly turned to the side of the corridor and respectfully cupped his hands in salute. Chu Tianlu greets Great Elder and Third Elder. Although Chu Tianlu did not greet Chu Hongding this time, he still nodded as a greeting. Lin Yi was speechless at his procrastination. Since they had already shed all pretense of cordiality, why bother with such a despicable person? If it were Lin Yi, he would have either slapped him to death or completely ignored him. The cultivator at the peak of the late golden elixir realm was the Chu family's great elder, Chu Yunting. When he saw Chu Tianlu, he nodded slightly and said, "Tianlu, what exactly happened? Tell me, the great elder." The other late golden elixir realm cultivator was the third elder that Chu Tianlu had mentioned. He was also the person in charge of the Chu family's discipline hall. His dark face was expressionless. He only looked at Chu Tianlu coldly. He did not speak, nor did he move. Without waiting for Chu Tianlu to speak, Chu Hongding interrupted. "Great Elder, what else is there to ask?" Tianliang, Wenshang, and Xingping acted together, but the three of them have not returned. Only Chu Tianlu has returned. It's obvious that he colluded with outsiders to harm his brothers. This kind of person should be executed immediately. Chu Yunting frowned slightly and said, "Hongding, what exactly happened can only be concluded after an investigation. How can you sentence him so hastily? Tianlu is a direct descendant of our Chu family. It's possible that he will become the family head in the future. He just can't be allowed to become the family head." Chu Hongding sneered inwardly, but he did not back down. He retorted, "Great Elder, Chu Hongding, beg to differ. Only Chu Tianlu has returned. Who knows if what he says is true or not? In any case, Tianliang and the others haven't returned. Won't everything be decided by Chu Tianlu's mouth?" The Chu family's way of doing things is truly an eye-opener. Lin Yi could not help but mock. He cast a sidelong glance at Chu Hongding disdainfully and said, Even though I've only known him for a short while, I understand what kind of person Chu Tianlu is. Getting him to spout nonsense and lie is even harder than killing him. On the other hand, Hungding medicinal cauldron or whatnot, spouting nonsense is your ultimate skill, isn't it? Chu Hungding glared fiercely at Lin Yi and said, "Little brat, what are you, an outsider, interrupting us for? Once we've dealt with the traitor of our Chu family, it'll naturally be your turn to settle the debt. There's no need for you to jump out and seek death in such a hurry, is there? I can't be bothered with your Chu family's matters. However, as for Chu Tianliang's matter, because I'm a witness, I'm reminding you out of goodwill. That brat should already be dead, right? However, this has nothing to do with Chu Tianlu. He was merely trapped in a secret realm during Taishi Island's training. He couldn't escape himself, so he can't blame others. If Lin Yi said he would testify for Chu Tianlu, he would definitely do as he said." Chapter 5472. A Genius in a Second. Remember love. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. However, Lin Yi reckoned that Chu Hungding wouldn't believe him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stopped Chu Tianlu from speaking. But this was fine. In any case, Lin Yi was here to stir up trouble. How could he be afraid of stirring up trouble? Chu Hungding sneered. "You and Chu Tianlu are clearly jackals of the same tribe. Do you think we'll believe your words? Tianliang's soul jade tablet hasn't even shattered yet. How could he be dead? You've clearly imprisoned him somewhere, haven't you?" Second uncle, Senior Lin speaks the truth. Chu Tianlu finally found an opportunity to speak, but he was rudely interrupted by Chu Hungding. "Shut up. What right does a shameless traitor have to speak in front of us? And you're even shamelessly calling this junior senior? He's just an ant at the great circle of foundation establishment. What kind of senior is he?" Chu Hungding roared. After lecturing Chu Tianlu, he immediately turned to Chu Yunting and said, "Great elder, there's no need to ask any more questions. These three must have colluded with each other and colluded with each other. We can be sure just by listening to their lies." Chu Yunting furrowed his brows and said, "You can't be so arbitrary. Hungding, I know how you feel. Tianliang is your most beloved son. It's normal for you to be worried when something happened to him. After all, Tianliang is also my descendant. However, this matter concerns the heavenly road. Both sides are flesh. We have to investigate thoroughly before we can conclude the case." "Great elder, what else is there to investigate? These three are all accomplices. You're willing to listen to their lies, but I don't want to waste time. Third elder, what do you think? Can't we just execute them?" Chu Hungding was extremely forceful. Not only did he directly reject the great elder's suggestion, he even dragged the third elder of the discipline hall into the water. Although the third elder was in charge of the discipline hall, he was secretly one of Chu Hungding's subordinates. That was why Chu Hungding had sent Chu Tianlu and the others into the discipline hall just now. Now that they were in the discipline hall, they were in Chu Hungding's territory. He could do whatever he wanted. He didn't believe he couldn't get the confession he wanted. The only thing that surprised Chu Hungding was that the great elder, Chu Yunting, had hurried over after hearing the news. The third elder didn't look at Chu Hungding. Instead, he looked indifferent and said expressionlessly, "Everything has to be clarified. We can't act too carelessly. But since Chu Tianliang and the others have disappeared, there are no witnesses. Chu Tianlu is the greatest suspect. Thus, Chu Tianlu's testimony isn't of Chu." Chu Hungding said. "Third Chu can't. Chu while elder can't." Chu Hungding glanced at the great elder complacently and said in high spirits, "In my opinion, Chu Tianlu, the traitor, should be executed immediately. The two accomplices he colluded with should accompany him as well." Chu Yunting's expression was rather unsightly. He already knew that Chu Hengding wanted the position of family head, but he didn't expect him to be this arrogant and despotic. He didn't even care about him, the great elder. Chu Hengding, we must report this matter to the family head and let him make a decision. After all, this involves two outstanding direct descendants. It can't be decided so casually. Chu Yunting felt a wave of helplessness when faced with Chu Hengding and the third elder. He could only bring up the family head. Speaking of which, he didn't have much of a relationship with Chu Hengding and Chu Tianlu. He was completely neutral, and the kind that didn't have any selfish motives. Protecting Chu Tianlu was for the sake of the Chu family, but if he had to fight Chu Hengding to the death just to protect Chu Tianlu, that was something he had to consider carefully. The family head is cultivating in seclusion. We can't disturb him before his birthday, so there's no need to trouble the family head with such a small matter. Otherwise, why would he need us elders? Aren't we supposed to share the family head's burdens at times like this? Chu Hengding had the upper hand, and immediately put on a righteous expression. Hee, it's rare to see such a shameless person. Wuching, why don't you come and take a look as well? Just treat it as a monkey show. Lin Yi's face was full of mockery. He couldn't be bothered to waste time listening to this guy's pretentious nonsense. Hearing Lin Yi's call, Bing Wuching slowly walked to the side of the fence. She stuck her head out and said, "Boss, are you talking about that old monkey? He's so ugly, how can I not look?" It was rare for this cold guy to have a sense of humor. Lin Yi laughed and said, "How can you be like this? Why are you speaking the truth blindly? He's ugly, but you don't have to insult a monkey, do you?" On the side, Chu Tianlu came to his senses and couldn't help but snicker. He was an honest man, but even a man made of clay had a temper. Chu Tianlu was quite annoyed by Chu Hengding's aggressiveness. Hearing Bing Wuching and Lin Yi's ridicule of Chu Tianlu, he immediately felt that his anger had been vented. Chu Hengding's face turned red, and he said coldly, "You two outsiders, since you can't wait to die, I'll fulfill your wish. I'll send you to reincarnation as soon as possible." Before he finished speaking, his peak-level mid-stage golden elixir aura was immediately revealed. He raised his hands, ready to attack Lin Yi and Bing Wuching. Chu Yunting's eyes narrowed, but he didn't open his mouth to stop them. Chu Tianlu was a direct descendant of the Chu family, and it was only right for him to protect him. As for Lin Yi and Bing Wuching, they weren't worthy of Chu Yunting risking falling out with Chu Hengding. "Stop! That's Senior Bing Wuching of the Snow Sword faction." Seeing that Chu Hengding was about to attack Lin Yi and Bing Wuching, Chu Tianlu immediately paled. He obviously wasn't worried about Chu Hengding's safety, but he was afraid that Chu Hengding would anger Lin Yi and Bing Wuching, which would bring disaster to the Chu family. The Snow Sword faction? Chu Hengding stopped in his tracks and immediately became hesitant. In terms of power, the Snow Sword faction naturally far surpassed the Chu family, and he had also heard of Bing Wuching's name. She was a genius disciple of the Snow Sword faction, and she was already an early-stage golden elixir expert at such a young age. One couldn't blame Chu Hengding for being ignorant and inexperienced, not knowing that Bing Wuching had already become a nascent soul old freak. The Chu family simply didn't have enough resources. The 4 big and 10 small clans and schools basically already knew that the Snow Sword faction had 3 nascent soul old freaks, and that its rise was unstoppable. However, Bing Wuching didn't go to all the other clans and schools with great fanfare, after all, so it was normal that the second-ranked clans and schools hadn't received the news yet. Chu Tianlu nodded forcefully and said, "That's right, it's Senior Bing Wuching from the Snow Sword faction. She's a nascent soul old ancestor of the Snow Sword faction, and she's on equal footing with grandfather. Second uncle, you mustn't neglect her." The second season of the online drama School Beauty is airing on iQIYI. Everyone can go watch it now. Please add the Fishman's QQ God account, Fishman2, and WeChat account 22. You'll get all the latest news, autographed books, and events. Chapter 5473. Reeks, Chu Hongding, who had been hesitant at first, immediately laughed out loud. "You traitor! You're lying without any basis. Bing Wuqing might be a genius, but who doesn't know that she's only at the early gold core stage? How laughable! If you hadn't said that, I might have been wary of the Snow Sword School. You've just overreached yourself." With that, Chu Hongding prepared to continue attacking. Since he was certain that Chu Tianlu was lying, it didn't matter even if it really was Bing Wuqing inside. At worst, he'd just push all the blame onto Chu Tianlu. Unfortunately, just as Chu Hongding was about to attack, he was stopped by Chu Yunting. Naturally, Chu Yunting would not oppose Chu Hongding for the sake of two nameless pawns. However, if one of them was a genius of the Snow Sword faction, the situation would be completely different. From a certain perspective, Chu Yunting and Chu Tianlu were rather similar. They were both willing to put aside their own personal gains and losses for the sake of the Chu clan. It was just that the extent to which the two of them could do so was different. "Stop! Chu Hongding, are you trying to put the Chu family on the line? The Snow Sword School isn't something we can offend. Regardless of whether it's Bing Wuqing inside or not, this matter must be handled by the family head." Chu Yunting, who had already taken a step back just now had a rather unyielding attitude. Not only that, but Chu Yunting's own peak late gold core aura also completely erupted, firmly suppressing Chu Hongding. Chu Hongding seemed to be on the verge of surpassing Chu Yunting in terms of power, but in terms of individual strength, Chu Hongding was still far inferior to Chu Yunting. "Great Elder, since you're so insistent, then let's go talk to the family head." Chu Hongding's expression was dark. He wasn't as strong as Chu Yunting, so there was nothing he could do. Even though he'd acted so strongly before, he still couldn't completely fall out with Chu Yunting. If things went awry, Chu Yunting would completely fall to Chu Tianlu's side. After saying that, Chu Hongding snorted coldly and left with the third elder. Yu won. Chu Yunting took a deep look at Chu Tianlu, Lin Yi, and Bing Wuqing. Then he turned around and left. Things had developed to this point, and it felt like the situation was getting out of control. Hopefully, things would turn for the better after the family head stepped in. However, Chu Yunting wasn't very confident about this. Instead, he felt a faint sense of unease. As it turned out, Chu Yunting's premonition was correct. Why was Chu Hongding, who was only at the peak of the middle stage of the gold core realm, able to surpass Chu Yunting, the great elder? It was because the family head trusted Chu Hongding. Chu Hongding, who had left first, used just a few words to successfully convince the head of the Chu family, Chu Yuntian. He made Chu Yuntian believe that Chu Tianlu had colluded with outsiders to harm his own brothers and clansmen. When Chu Yunting arrived, Chu Yuntian's anger was already rising, and his face was extremely gloomy. "Family head, this matter still needs to be thoroughly investigated." Chu Yunting felt helpless. Because Chu Hongding was deeply trusted by Chu Yuntian, he had been able to quickly enter and meet with the family head. On the other hand, Chu Yunting, as the great elder, had been obstructed and delayed for a while. As a result, he couldn't even speak firmly. Before Chu Yunting could finish speaking, Chu Yuntian waved his hand and said, "Yunting, you don't need to say anything more." Chu Tianlu, that unfilial descendant, not only colluded with outsiders to harm his own brothers, but also found someone to pretend to be a nascent soul ancestor and come to the family to swindle people. This is truly intolerable. Chu Yunting's heart skipped a beat. Originally, he had hoped that the family head would be able to turn the situation around. Now, it seemed that it would be good if he didn't add oil to the fire. For the sake of the Chu family, Chu Yunting could only brace himself and say, "Family head, let's put the matter of Heavenly Road aside for now. This matter also involves Bing Wuching of the Snow Sword faction. In my opinion, that young man doesn't seem to be a fake, so we still need to be cautious in this matter." What Chu Yunting was implying was that, let alone the fact that the Chu family was only a small family right now, even if they managed to form a marriage alliance with the Leaf Spirit sect, they would at most become the weakest of the 10 small sections. There was no way they could compare to an established sect like the Snow Sword sect. Offending the Snow Sword sect would only bring them harm. After hearing Chu Yunting's words, Chu Yuntian calmed down a little. After a moment's thought, he said, "No matter what, Tianlu is still my grandson, a direct descendant of the Chu family. I'll just meet him once and listen to what he has to say. As for those two people, regardless of whether they are Bing Wuching of the Snow Sword faction or not, let them come with me." Chu Hengding glared at Chu Yunting hatefully. If this old man hadn't messed things up, Chu Tianlu would have died today. But it didn't matter now. Since Chu Yuntian already had a preconceived impression of Chu Tianlu, it would probably be very difficult for him to believe Chu Tianlu's words. If Chu Yuntian didn't have such a personality, Chu Hengding wouldn't have had the opportunity to control the entire Chu family's economy. "Hengding, send someone to the dungeon to bring Chu Tianlu and those two outsiders out. Bring them to my Yangyuan Hall to see me." Chu Yuntian turned his head and gave this order, then got up and prepared to leave. This was Chu Yuntian's training room, so he naturally couldn't allow outsiders to casually enter, and the Yangyuan Hall was the place where he received outsiders. Chu Hengding bowed and said, "Yes, family head." He didn't want Chu Tianlu to leave the underground prison so quickly. He didn't even want to send him back after a while. UU3, unfortunately, Chu Yuntian was the clan master and a nascent soul-old monster at that. With Chu Yuntian's status, it was obviously impossible for him to lower himself to the dungeon. He could only send someone to bring the three of them to the Yangyuan Hall. As for Chu Hengding himself, he definitely wouldn't leave Chu Yuntian's side. He didn't want Chu Yunting to cause trouble and ruin the situation. Chu Hengding and Chu Yunting looked at each other with unfriendly expressions when they saw Chu Yuntian leave. They didn't say anything and quietly followed Chu Yuntian to the Yangyuan Hall. After a while, Chu Tianlu, Lin Yi, and Bing Wuching were all escorted over. Because they were here to see the Chu family's master, Chu Hengding's subordinates didn't make things difficult for them. "Grandfather." As soon as they entered the Yangyuan Hall, Chu Tianlu took 2 steps forward and knelt down. Lin Yi shook his head inwardly. This guy was really too honest. Since you've already knelt down, you should at least cry and complain about your grievances. All you did was call him grandfather, and that was it. Those who didn't know better would think that you were feeling guilty. Chu Hengding snorted and said, "You traitor! How dare you call grandfather the family head? The matter hasn't been decided yet. How can you pin the traitor label on Tianlu?" Chu Yunting immediately stood up to refute Chu Hengding. He had already made up his mind. Since he had already offended Chu Hengding, it didn't matter if it was more or less. Chapter 5474. Chu Yuntian raised his hand and said, "Stop arguing. You two aren't kids anymore. How improper." With that, his gaze swept past Lin Yi and Bing Wuching and finally landed on Chu Tianlu. He sighed softly and said, "Tianlu, tell us everything truthfully. Don't hide anything." "Yes." Chu Tianlu nodded respectfully, then straightened his body and said, "Actually, we have to start from the start of the trial on Tai Snake Island. The four of us teamed up to search for the divine knowledge fruit, but at the last moment, Tianliang brought Chu Wenshang and Chu Xingping to attack me. They wanted to kill me. Liar! Chu Hunding sneered. If the three of them wanted to kill you, would you be able to return alive? Forget about the three of them. Even Chu Wenshang alone would be enough to easily dispose of you. There was one more thing Chu Hunding didn't say, and that was the offensive and defensive treasures he privately gave Chu Tianliang. Those were all top-notch weapons that belonged to the Chu family. Even without Chu Wenshang, just Chu Tianliang alone was enough to easily and happily take care of Chu Tianlu. Chu Yuntian nodded. He felt that Chu Hunding's words were very reasonable, but his attention wasn't here. After Chu Hunding finished speaking, he immediately asked, "Tianlu, did you get the divine knowledge fruit?" Linny rolled his eyes. It was obvious that he was going to be sold again. As expected, Chu Tianlu hesitated and said, "Grandfather, I didn't get the divine knowledge fruit." Then he glanced at Lin. There was nothing wrong with his words, but the problem was with the glance he gave Lin Yi. It wasn't that Chu Tianlu was deliberately betraying Lin Yi, but that he would subconsciously not hide it from his grandfather. Although he didn't directly say that the divine knowledge fruit was in Lin Yi's hands, that glance was enough to explain many things. Everyone present was a wily old fox, and there was no one who didn't understand what Lin Yi was implying. It wasn't just Chu Yuntian. Even Chu Yunting and Chu Hunding were looking at Lin Yi with a little more passion. The consciousness fruit was a heavenly treasure that could directly raise the level of one's consciousness. The ancient minor underworld focused on the cultivation of one's consciousness and the cultivation of one's physical body. A consciousness fruit was definitely comparable to an elixir that could directly raise the level of one's strength. Chu Tianlu, you finally revealed yourself at a time like this. Chu Hunding suddenly roared. He greatly coveted the spiritual awareness fruit, but he also knew that even if there really was one, it definitely wouldn't be his turn to enjoy it. At this time, it was more important to confirm Chu Tianlu's crime. So he had to take advantage of the situation and use the spiritual consciousness fruit to make Chu Yuntian completely give up on Chu Tianlu. You even said that Tianliang and the others wanted to kill you. It's clear that for the sake of the spiritual awareness fruit, you colluded with outsiders to harm your own brothers and clansmen. And here I was wondering what reason you had to deal with Tianliang and kill Wenshang and Xingping. So it was to kill them and steal their treasures. When Chu Hunding finished speaking, even he himself believed that this was the truth. A liar could tell a lie that they themselves believed to be the truth. Thus, deceiving others was naturally successful. This was especially true for Chu Yuntian. He already had a preconceived impression that Chu Tianlu had colluded with outsiders. Now that Chu Hunding had even found his motive, what else was there to doubt? This was especially true for the spiritual awareness fruit. If Chu Yuntian could obtain the spiritual awareness fruit, it was very likely that he would smoothly break through to the peak of the early nascent soul stage. Since he knew that the spiritual awareness fruit was most likely in Lin Yi's hands, he would not let Chu Tianlu go no matter what. Only by using Chu Tianlu's weakness could he implicate Lin Yi and even Bing Wuqing. That way, the Snow Sword School would have nothing to say. Tianlu, I didn't think that you would still refuse to tell the truth in front of me, the family leader. This old man is truly disappointed in you. Chu Yuntian's face was filled with disappointment and anger. He shook his head dispiritedly and said, "Since you're still not willing to tell the truth, then as the family leader, I can only use the family law and punish you in the name of righteousness." Clap, clap, clap. Linny clapped again and again. His speed was not fast, but it was very clear and steady. It sounded like he was slapping Chu Yuntian's face. Life is indeed like a play, and it all depends on acting skills. I've really opened my eyes today. Lin Yi's face was full of ridicule. His gaze rested on the face of Chu Yuntian, the family leader of the Chu family, and he said indifferently, "Old man, Tianlu is your grandson no matter what. If you want to deal with him, you don't have to use such fake acting skills to insult his intelligence. Just do it openly." Chu Yuntian was just about to cause trouble for Lin Yi. He did not expect that Lin Yi would directly come to him. He immediately sneered and said, "Who do you think you are? How dare you be so presumptuous in front of this old man? But it doesn't matter. Since you're in cahoots with Chu Tianlu, you must have a part in the matter of Chu Tianliang and the other two. Prepare to accompany Chu Tianlu. I already said don't look for excuses. Don't look for excuses. Just do what you want to do openly." Lin Yi continued to mock him. "Your clumsy acting skills really leave me speechless." Pointing at Chu Tianlu, Lin Yi continued, "You didn't listen to a single word of what he said." "Oh, I'm sorry, but you probably did listen to a single word, such as the divine knowledge fruit." Chu Yuntian's expression immediately turned ugly. Everything Lin Yi said was the truth. It was precisely because it was the truth that Chu Yuntian felt so uncomfortable when it was exposed. You treat Chu Tianlu's words as farts, but you treat that idiot's farts as immortal qi and breathe in all of them, right? Lin Yi casually pulled Chu Hongding into his attack range. In the end, he said mercilessly, "Since you've chosen to be shameless, then you might as well tear off all of your masks. Be shameless to the very end. That way, I'll have a bit of respect for you." "Insolence, young one!" Chu Yuntian immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. After becoming a nascent soul old monster, there were not many people in the immemorial Jianghu who had the qualifications to speak to him like this, and not to give him any face at all. He had originally wanted to cause trouble for Lin Yi and steal the divine knowledge fruit. Now, it was even more logical for him to make a move. Don't think that just because you have the Snow Sword School behind you, I won't dare to touch you. Even if Yu Taitsong comes, I won't let you off today. Chu Yuntian had already made up his mind, so he no longer hesitated. He completely released his early nascent soul strength and raised his hand to grab at Lin Yi. And then, it was not Lin Yi who made a move, but Bing Wuqing who had flashed in front of Lin Yi and shielded Lin Yi behind her. Before Lin Yi spoke, he had already sent a sound transmission to Bing Wuqing, telling her that if the other party made a move, she could directly counterattack. So, when Chu Yuntian made a move, Bing Wuqing had already reacted. Now, she did not hold back at all in carrying out Lin Yi's orders. Chapter 5475. A Nascent Soul Old Monster. Chu Yuntian's raised arm froze in the air. He stared in shock at Bing Wuqing, who had revealed her strength at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. It was unrealistic. There really was a nascent soul old monster. Wasn't Bing Wuqing only at the early golden core stage? What was going on? At that moment, Chu Yuntian felt as if there were 10,000 spiritual beasts galloping and howling in his heart. You're a nascent soul old monster, but you're pretending to be weak. You even allowed yourself to be thrown into the dungeon. Do you have masochistic tendencies? Or are you trying to trick people? Chu Hongding felt the same way as Chu Yuntian. He didn't expect Bing Wuqing to really be a nascent soul old monster. No, he should have, because he knew better than anyone that Chu Tianlu was basically telling the truth. It was just that he had habitually taken it as a lie. An honest man who never lied said that Bing Wuqing was a nascent soul old monster, but Chu Hongding didn't believe him. What else could he say? Lin Yi smiled faintly and shrugged at the few people who were instantly silent. Yu Taitsong didn't come, but I don't think he'll come either. By the way, Patriarch Chu, what are you going to do to us? Ah, my head is so itchy. I have no choice but to scratch it. Chu Yuntian coughed, dryly, forcibly withdrawing his arm that was frozen in the air. He mechanically scratched the back of his head, and then said righteously, if Yu Taitsong came, he would definitely not allow you to interfere in other people's matters. Since he did not come, then there is nothing for you to do. Uffed. Linny was shocked. This old man's skin was so thick that even a machine gun in the secular world couldn't penetrate it. Chu Yintian was also sullen. He was a nascent soul old ancestor, one of the few people at the top of the immemorial Jianghu. When had he ever suffered such depression? But Bing Wuqing's strength was above his, and the Snow Sword School behind her was far stronger than the Chu family. Chu Yuntian could only swallow his anger. After calmly withdrawing his aura, Chu Yuntian smiled awkwardly and said, so it really is an esteemed guest from the Snow Sword School. Sorry for the delay. Let's not talk about the misunderstanding earlier. Lin Yi looked at Chu Yuntian playfully and said with a faint smile, oh, was it all a misunderstanding before? So, you also believe what Chu Qianlu said? Chu Yuntian secretly gritted his teeth and forced out a smile. This matter still needs to be properly investigated. There is no need to rush to a conclusion. Bing Wuqing's face was cold, and she said coldly, I can testify for Chu Tianlu what he said is the truth. They didn't know Bing Wuqing's identity at first, or even if they did, they just thought that she was a junior at the beginning stage of the Golden Elixir realm. As for testifying, of course, it was up to Chu Yuntian and the others to believe whatever they wanted. But now, it was completely different. Bing Wuqing was also a nascent soul old monster, and her strength could only be higher than Chu Yuntian's. Her status was also extremely noble. If she said she could testify for Chu Tianlu, Chu Hengding wouldn't dare to say a word against her. Even Chu Yuntian would have to think it over carefully. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Bing. I will naturally take care of this matter. Chu Yuntian's expression was a little unsightly. He narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, speaking of which, the Snow Sword School really has a good reputation. Your school has always been independent and has never interacted with other schools. That's why we, the Chu family, haven't received any news of fellow Taoist Bing's advancement to the nascent soul realm. What he meant was that the Snow Sword School usually didn't have the habit of meddling in the affairs of other families or schools. Although Bing Wuqing was a nascent soul old monster, it was best that she didn't come to the Chu family and tell them what to do. After all, Chu Yuntian was also a nascent soul old monster. It was absolutely impossible for him to submit to Bing Wuqing just like that and listen to her from then on. By the way, which Snow Sword School are you from? I've heard a lot about fellow Taoist Bing, but I've never heard of you before. Chu Yuntian didn't want to dwell on the topic just now, so he changed the topic and asked about Lin Yi. With Bing Wuqing's strength and status, Chu Yuntian definitely wouldn't have any other thoughts if the spirit knowledge fruit was in her hands. However, judging from Chu Tianlu's behavior, the spirit knowledge fruit seemed to be in Lin Yi's hands. So, Chu Yuntian still had some thoughts, and was prepared to find out more about Lin Yi before making a decision based on the situation. Haha, I'm not from the Snow Sword School. Lin Yi smiled and shrugged. His expression didn't show the slightest bit of respect for the Snow Sword School. This made Chu Yuntian secretly happy, thinking that he might really get the spirit knowledge fruit. So, you're not from the Snow Sword School, little friend. But looking at your heroic appearance, you must be from a famous sect, right? Chu Yuntian continued to put on a gentle smile. If Lin Yi really was a nobody with no background, even if he had Bing Wuqing as a friend, Chu Yuntian wouldn't have anything to fear. Besides, from Chu Yuntian's point of view, Bing Wuqing probably just happened to be there. Otherwise, How could a dignified, nascent soul old monster like him befriend an ant who had perfected the foundation establishment stage? Old man, you're going around in circles. Aren't you just trying to pry into my background and see if you can snatch the spirit knowledge fruit from me? Why don't you just say it? Why are you wasting so much effort? Lin Yi's expression was full of sarcasm. He was here to stir up trouble. If Chu Yuntian were to admit defeat after seeing Bing Wuqing's strength, it would go against his original intention. Chu Yuntian's face darkened. He was a dignified, nascent soul old monster, and the Chu family master was speaking so politely to him that anyone who came would give him some face. But why was this brat so unpredictable? He didn't even think about it. Since Lin Yi had already mocked and ridiculed him before, how could he suddenly be nice to him now? Not to mention that Chu Yuntian was still unwilling to let go of the matter regarding Chu Qianlu. Even if Lin Yi wasn't here to stir up trouble, he would definitely not be nice to him. At the side, Chu Qianlu really didn't want the relationship between Lin Yi and the Chu family to deteriorate. He could only interrupt weakly. Grandfather, Senior Lin is from the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. Chu Yuntian's heart thumped again. The Blue Cloud sect of the North Island was also in existence that the Chu family didn't dare to provoke, especially when the Blue Cloud sect, Rising Sky sect, and Xuanji sect were all on the same side. Even the Snow Sword School probably wouldn't dare to go against them easily. No wonder Bing Wuqing would hang out with this brat named Lin. It turned out that their backgrounds were about the same, but the Snow Sword School and the Blue Cloud sect didn't seem to be on good terms. Could they have some secret agreement? Chapter 5476. Reeks. Chu Yuntian thought a little too much for a moment, but he immediately withdrew his thoughts. Since he knew that Lin Yi was not a simple person, then he could not take the spirit knowledge fruit by force. Ha ha ha, so you are a disciple of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island. Ha ha ha, so you're a disciple of the Northern Island's Blue Cloud sect. My Chu family is truly honored to have fellow Bing from the Snow Sword faction and fellow Lin from the Blue Cloud sect. I'm so happy. It just so happens that in a few days, it'll be my birthday. Why don't the two of you do me the honor of temporarily staying in our Chu family for a few days? When the time comes, you can attend my birthday banquet together. Chu Yuntian was becoming more and more adept at changing his expression. When he spoke, it was as if he were talking to two old friends. Remembering that Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing were standing up for Chu Qianlu, Chu Yuntian did not wait for them to answer, but turned to Chu Qianlu and said, "Qianlu, about Tianliang, I'll investigate carefully. If you really have nothing to do with it, I won't wrongly accuse you. You don't have to go to the dungeon for the time being. Take good care of your two distinguished guests." Lin Yi smiled coldly in his heart. This old man obviously didn't believe Chu Qianlu, otherwise he wouldn't be calling him old man all the time. Normally speaking to Chu Qianlu, he'd be calling himself grandpa, right? Bing Wuqing did not respond to Chu Yuntian's invitation. She just stood there expressionlessly. Anyway, she was only here to accompany Lin Yi. What to do next was up to Lin Yi. Lin Yi thought that this was not the best time to bring up Duanmu Yu's marriage, so he nodded indifferently and said, "Then let's do it this way. Qianlu, let's go. Help us settle down first." Before Chu Qianlu could speak, Chu Yuntian laughed dryly and raised his hand. "By the way, fellow Lin, did you get the spirit knowledge fruit in the end?" "So what?" Lin Yi did not deny it. There was no point in denying it. With Chu Qianlu by his side, as long as Chu Yuntian asked him, he would definitely say it, and perhaps even more. "You won. Little friend Lin, look, the spiritual knowledge fruit is a treasure of heaven and earth. It would be too wasteful for you to use it at your current level. How about this old man exchange it with a golden core. It would be much better than using the spiritual knowledge fruit to improve your cultivation. Of course, a gold core may not be as valuable as a spiritual knowledge fruit. How about this? This old man will add some other heavenly materials and earthly treasures if you need spirit jades. What do you think? In order to obtain the spiritual knowledge fruit, Chu Yuntian was willing to sacrifice his old face. With Bing Wuching around, in addition to Lin Yi's background in the Azure Cloud sect, Chu Yuntian had already given up on the idea of snatching it by force. However, he still did not give up and wanted to use some things to exchange for the consciousness fruit. However, he did not consider that if he obtained the consciousness fruit and someone else used the same conditions to exchange for it, would he trade it away? Linny looked at Chu Yuntian like he was looking at an idiot, then took out a spiritual knowledge fruit, tossed it up and down a few times, and said, "Do you think it's a waste for me to use a spiritual knowledge fruit now?" Chu Yuntian did not know what Linny meant and could only bite the bullet and nod. "Well, if you put it that way, it's quite a waste." Linny looked very agreeable, which made Chu Yuntian secretly happy, thinking that there was a chance for this exchange. Then Chu Yuntian saw Lin Yi put the spiritual knowledge fruit to his mouth and took a big bite. As he ate, he said vaguely, "It's crispy, so delicious. Why do you care if it's a waste or not?" Chu Yuntian almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. F***CK. That was a spiritual knowledge fruit, and you just ate it like a rotten apple. Forget about fasting and bathing. You should at least take it seriously, right? After eating it, you will level up. Don't you need to go into seclusion? If it were someone else, Chu Yuntian's thoughts would not be wrong, but Lin Yi really ate the spiritual knowledge fruit like it was an apple, and it was fine. The spiritual knowledge fruit's medicinal properties were very gentle to begin with, and it was far from the overbearing tempering effect of the spiritual knowledge grass root. If it were the spiritual knowledge grass root, Lin Yi would not dare to eat it so casually. As for leveling up, there were still 9 cancerous spiritual knowledge tumors in Lin Yi's primordial spirit that had not been removed. Before that, the spiritual knowledge fruit would not allow Lin Yi to level up, so there was no need to go into seclusion. As Lin Yi gnawed on the spiritual knowledge fruit, he called for Bing Wuching and Chu Tianlu to leave. As for Chu Yuntian and the others, he could not be bothered with them. Bing Wuching was originally as cold as ice, so when Lin Yi acted like this, she followed suit and turned to leave. Chu Tianlu, however, did not dare to do what Lin Yi and the others did. He respectfully bowed to Chu Yuntian, and the others one by one then took his leave. Once the 3 of them left, Chu Hongding let out a long sigh. He immediately jumped out and fanned the flames. "Family head, you can't possibly believe Chu Tianlu just like that, right? There's something strange about this." "Chu Hongding, what else do you want? The family head has already said that he'll investigate this matter." Chu Yunting glared at Chu Hongding. Although the development of the situation had exceeded his expectations, it was still a good sign. He didn't want any unforeseen events to occur because of Chu Hongding. Yu3, Chu Yuntian, was suppressing the anger in his heart. He immediately growled, "Don't be noisy. Don't you think this old man is annoying enough?" Chu Hongding understood that Chu Yuntian was extremely dissatisfied with Lin Yi and the others, especially since Lin Yi had eaten the spiritual knowledge fruit he coveted right in front of him. If it weren't for the fact that he was worried about the Blue Cloud sect and Bing Wuching, Chu Yuntian might even have thought of killing Lin Yi. Thus, the situation was still in Chu Hongding's favor. Taking advantage of Chu Yunting's silence after being yelled at, Chu Hongding continued, "Family head, I'm not trying to cause trouble. Chu Tianlu is indeed suspicious. Think about it. If he already knew Bing Wuching and Lin Yi from the Blue Cloud sect, why didn't he mention them before? If he had said that we had these 2 powerful reinforcements, Our Chu family wouldn't have to rely on marriage to obtain the right to enter the 10 small families. Chu Hongding was right. It wasn't just Chu Yuntian. Even Chu Yunting couldn't refute him. If the Chu family could use these two to form a connection with the Snow Sword sect and the Blue Cloud sect, it would be many times more effective than the already declining Leaf Spirit sect. If Chu Tianlu hadn't used these connections, it wouldn't have mattered. But after the trial ended, Tianliang went missing when Shang and Xingping died, and he brought Bing Wuqing and Lin Yi back with him. Family head, why don't you tell me what Chu Tianlu is trying to do? Chu Hongding saw that Chu Yuntian had listened to him, so he continued to analyze the situation sincerely. Before Chu Yuntian and Chu Yunting could figure out what Chu Tianlu was trying to do, Chu Hongding raised his voice by an octave and swung his fist fiercely. Chu Tianlu is trying to force the Chu family to abdicate. Don't be fooled by that brat acting like an honest person all this time. You can see now that he's a wolf with wild ambitions. Tianliang is the only one among the younger generation who can be more outstanding than him. So Chu Tianlu is secretly plotting to take advantage of this trial to bring people to harm Tianliang, then use Bing Wuqing and Lin Yi's influence to force the family head to acknowledge his position as the Chu family successor. Chapter 5477. Genius 1 second. Remember the web, providing you with wonderful novels to read. After saying this, Chu Hongding felt that he was awesome. He was actually able to deduce the truth so perfectly. If he had been to the secular world, he might have even pretentiously added, "There is only one truth." Chu Yuntian had already believed Chu Hongding's words before. Now he was even more convinced. Even Chu Yunting was silent. He didn't know how to refute Chu Hongding's words. Hongding, take good care of the two guests for the next few days. Don't give them any excuse to act up. As for Chu Tianlu, let him move freely for the time being. However, someone must secretly monitor his actions at all times. When the two of them leave the Chu clan, we will settle the score with this unfilial descendant. Chu Yuntian made the decision with a gloomy face. Chu Hongding was naturally overjoyed, and Chu Yunting couldn't raise any objections. After all, the decision was made by the clan master. He couldn't object. Chu Tianlu didn't know that he had been labeled as a traitor by the Chu clan. He was still very happy to thank Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. This time, it's all thanks to Senior Lin and Senior Bing's help. Otherwise, this junior would really be misunderstood by the clan. Lin Yi shook his head inwardly. This poor child was really naive. The group of people, led by Chu Hongding, had never misunderstood him. When it came to arranging guests, there would naturally be servants. Chu Tianlu was just accompanying them. Under the guidance of the Chu clan's disciples, Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing were arranged to stay in a separate courtyard. The environment was very quiet and elegant. Obviously, it wasn't a place where ordinary guests could stay. Seniors, this is the guest room of the Chu clan for receiving distinguished guests. If you need anything, you can ask the servants to do it at any time. Chu Tianlu and Lin Yi were already quite familiar with each other, but they still maintained enough respect when they spoke. Lin Yi nodded indifferently and said, "This place is not bad. Anyway, we're only staying here for a few days. You don't have to worry about it." After pausing for a moment, Lin Yi took out the crab's niden and handed it to Chu Tianlu. "This niden is for you. Prepare the pill formulas and send them to me. This is what we agreed on before. Is there a problem?" Chu Tianlu was overjoyed. He immediately stretched out his hands and carefully received the core. "Of course, there's no problem. Senior Lin, this is a great help to this junior. With this nascent soul stage sea beast core, this junior's grandfather will have the opportunity to refine a nascent soul golden core and break through his current realm. perhaps the matter that was targeting this junior will be completely resolved. It's good that there's no problem. Hurry up and get this done. Lin Yi waved his hand, indicating that Chu Tianlu could leave. Yes, Senior Lin and Senior Bing. Rest well. This junior will take his leave first. The pill formula will be sent over soon. Chu Tianlu held the inner core and bowed respectfully. Then he happily went to look for the pill formula. After Chu Tianlu left, Bing Wuqing shook her head and said, "Boss, if you want these pill formulas, I can think of a way to get them. After all, in the ancient world, the precious things are the ingredients and alchemists for refining pills. As for these pill formulas, they're not that rare." "Ha. So you're saying that there's no need for me to give the Naiden to Chu Tianlu?" Lin Yi turned to look at Bing Wuqing and asked with a smile. A rare smile appeared on Bing Wuqing's expressionless face. "No, what I'm saying is that if boss really wants these pill formulas, I can think of a way to get them. As for Chu Tianlu, let's not hold too much hope. When we were on the island, I still had some hope for Chu Tianlu. But with the current situation, it's not very likely that he'll be able to get the pill formulas. However, this is exactly what I want." Lin Yi shrugged and turned to walk back to his room. "You should rest as well. Let's wait and see what the Naiden will bring us in the end." "Yes, Boss Lin Yi," Bing Wuqing replied. After a moment of silence, she showed an understanding expression. After Lin Yi entered his room, she walked into the room next to Lin Yi's and began to cultivate cross-legged. After about 20 minutes, Chu Tianlu returned to Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing's small courtyard. He paced back and forth in front of Lin Yi's door, but he didn't go up and knock. Lin Yi already knew that Chu Tianlu was coming, so he didn't make him wait. He opened the door and said, "I'm done. Senior Lin, I'm too useless. I couldn't get the pill formulas you wanted." Chu Tianlu lowered his head and cupped his hands in shame. "It's fine if you couldn't get them. Is it because your family doesn't have the pill formulas?" In reality, Lin Yi already knew this result. With Chu Tianlu's current awkward position in the Chu clan, it would be strange if he could get the pill formulas. Exchanging the Naiden of a nascent soul stage sea beast for the pill formulas wasn't important for the pill formulas, but for the Naiden. Lin Yi already knew that with Chu Tianlu's current status, it would be impossible for him to get the pill formulas. However, the Chu clan definitely wouldn't give up on the Naiden of a nascent soul stage sea beast, especially when the Naiden was in Chu Tianlu's hands. As expected, Chu Tianlu's next words confirmed Lin Yi's guess. The pill formulas should be there, but Chu Hengding wasn't willing to give them to me. Not only that, he even snatched your Naiden away. He said that his youngest son, Chu Tianhao, bought it and prepared it as a birthday gift for his grandfather. You directly took the Naiden to Chu Hengding to get the pill formulas. Lin Yi was completely speechless. He had planned for Chu Tianlu to take out the Naiden to attract the attention of the people in the Chu clan. He didn't think that this guy would be so honest and directly go to Chu Hengding to exchange for the Naiden. Don't you know that Chu Hengding has already shed all pretense of cordiality with you? Don't talk about accepting the Naiden that was sent to him. It's already very kind of Chu Hengding to not accuse you of stealing and kill you. To be honest, if Chu Yuntian didn't say that he would temporarily let Chu Tianlu stay to entertain Lin Yi and Chu Wuyo, Chu Hengding might really have taken the opportunity to teach Chu Tianlu a lesson. However, this wasn't something that Lin Yi could have predicted. Chu Tianlu thought about it now and realized that he had indeed done something stupid. After hearing Lin Yi's question, he said shyly, "Chu Hengding is in charge of all the finances and resources of the Chu clan. If I want to exchange, I can only go to him. So I just sent myself to him to be snatched away." Lin Yi rubbed his forehead helplessly. Although this was originally his plan, and the results of Chu Tianlu's actions this time were much better than he expected, Lin Yi really didn't know what to say about Chu Tianlu's character. To be continued. Chapter 5478. Genius 1 second, remember the net, providing you with interesting novels to read. How did this guy grow up under the covetous eyes of Chu Hengding and his son? How did he even participate in the trials alive and well? Senior Lin Yi, although the inner core has been stolen, I will definitely find a way to get the pill formula back for you. If I can't do it, I'd rather die as an apology. Chu Tianlu felt that he really owed Lin Yi too much, so he swore fiercely. Lin Yi waved his hand and said, "It's not that serious, it's just an inner core. Didn't you say that Chu Hengding wanted his son to give it to Chu Yunxing as a birthday gift? I'll just get it back then." Since Chu Hengding dared to steal Lin Yi's things, he naturally had a set of excuses. For example, he could say that Lin Yi's inner core was stolen by Chu Tianlu. However, would Lin Yi care about these excuses? After thinking about it, Lin Yi still said a few more words to prevent Chu Tianlu from going into a dead end. "You really don't have to worry about it. I'll take care of this matter. Keep a low profile these few days, and don't provoke Chu Hengding and his people. Wait until your grandfather's birthday." Chu Tianlu said, "Solemnly, thank you for your advice, Senior Lin. I understand." After all, Chu Tianlu was just being honest, not stupid. He could still understand Lin Yi's meaning. After feeling the fall of his status and the malice of Chu Hengding's people, he also knew that he had to keep a low profile to protect himself. Everything would be revealed in a few days at Chu Yunxing's birthday. On the day of Chu Yunqian's birthday, the Chu family was decorated with lanterns and streamers. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing also received an invitation early on. Accompanied by Chu Tianlu, they went to the Chu family's guest hall. At this time, there were already many guests in the guest hall. Before they entered, they could hear Chu Yunqian's hearty laughter. Obviously, he was in a good mood. "Let's sit by the door. It'll be quieter." Lin Yi didn't want to join in the fun, so he said lightly. Bing Wuqing completely followed Lin Yi's lead, so she naturally didn't have any objections. Chu Tianlu had been used to keeping a low profile for the past few days, so he didn't think it was inappropriate. So the three of them entered the room and sat down in an empty corner. From this position, he could have a panoramic view of everything in the hall without attracting attention. For Lin Yi, this was very ideal. Most of the cultivators in the hall were focused on Chu Yuntian. As for the three people in the corner, they didn't care at all. As long as they had some status, they would be invited to sit next to Chu Yuntian. Those who sat in the corner were mostly younger disciples. With the age of Lin Yi and the other two, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. "Ha! Your Chu family's face isn't small. There are quite a few sects that have come to congratulate you." Lin Yi casually swept his gaze over them and lightly smiled. "Just the nascent soul eccentrics. There are almost 10. I presume your Chu family won't have any problems becoming one of the 10 minor sects this time." Many thanks for Senior Lin's auspicious words. Chu Tianlu hastily cupped his fists and bowed in thanks. For someone like him who was always thinking about the Chu family, there was nothing happier than hearing that the Chu family would prosper. Lin Yi waved his hand and didn't say anything. His gaze fell on the two people beside Chu Yuntian. The Leaf Spirit sect master was Yi Qingcheng. As for the melancholy beauty standing beside him, wasn't that Duan Muyu? He hadn't expected Duan Muyu to also come to the Chu family. Lin Yi faintly smiled. Thinking about it, it was normal. Since the Leaf Spirit sect was preparing to have a marriage alliance with the Chu family, then the main character of the marriage alliance, Duan Muyu had to come to Chu Yuntian's birthday celebration. Lin Yi looked at Duan Muyu and then at Chu Yuntian. This was also good. He would thoroughly resolve this matter today. Bing Wuqing also seemed to see some problems. Lin Yi, Duan Muyu seems a bit off. Do you want to go take a look? Bing Wuqing knew about Lin Yi and Duan Muyu's relationship. So when she saw Duan Muyu, she subconsciously carefully observed her. She found that her eyes were empty, without any expression. It's fine. She's just too worried. Lin Yi didn't mind. There was nothing wrong with Duan Muyu. Otherwise, she wouldn't have such a melancholy aura. Although he knew Duan Muyu was fine, Lin Yi inexplicably felt a bit of heartache when he saw her like this. Bing Wuqing looked at Duan Muyu again and didn't say anything else. As time passed, more or less all the guests had arrived. Those who had come from far away had basically arrived a day or so earlier. So Lin Yi's group of 3 was quickly filled with young cultivators. After Chu Yuntian stood up and said a few words of thanks, the formal banquet began. The delicacies that had been prepared long ago were brought up like flowing water. However, Lin Yi's group of 3 only tasted a little. They chatted idly with the people next to them. After 3 rounds of wine, the Chu clan's juniors began to present their birthday gifts. This was a necessary part of a birthday banquet. The meaning was to let others see the prosperity of a clan. Grandpa Patriarch, I wish you happiness as great as the East Sea and longevity as long as the South Mountain. The first to come out was a 3rd-generation junior from the Chu clan's side branch. In terms of seniority, he could be considered Chu Yuntian's grandson. What this side branch junior presented was a formation diagram hand-drawn by a famous master. Although it was a simple formation diagram, it was still a pretty good item. It barely qualified as the first birthday gift. Chu Yuntian nodded with a smile. It was hard to tell whether he was satisfied or not. Chu Hongding, who was standing beside him, took the formation diagram and put it aside. Lin Yi frowned slightly and said, "Why do I feel that Chu Hongding's aura is a little unstable? Did that old guy break through in the past 2 days?" "I didn't hear that." Chu Tianlu raised his head and looked at Chu Hongding strangely. He shook his head and said he should have been busy with Grandpa's birthday banquet these past few days. How could he have had time to go into seclusion to break through? With Chu Tianlu's level, whether Chu Hongding had broken through or not, he wouldn't be able to tell. However, what he said made sense. Chu Hongding had been busy preparing for the birthday banquet these past few days. He really shouldn't have had time to go into seclusion to break through, unless he was like Bing Wuqing and had the support of a tycoon like Lin Yi, who gave away pills like candy. Bing Wuqing also looked at Chu Hongding carefully. Then she shook her head slightly at Lin Yi, indicating that he couldn't see anything strange either. Lin Yi shrugged and said indifferently, "Maybe I saw wrongly." "Forget it. There's no need to pay too much attention to such a small character." Chu Tianlu sweated slightly. Only a ruthless person like Lin Yi could call Chu Hongding, who was at the peak of the middle stage of the Aurus Core realm, a small character. In any sect or family, the peak of the middle stage of the Aurus Core realm was considered a high-level battle force. To be continued. Chapter 5479. In the time it took to say a few words, a few more descendants from the side branches presented their gifts. They weren't too valuable and could only be said to be average. Chu Yuntian maintained his smile. Lin Yi suddenly turned to ask Chu Tianlu, "What gift did you prepare? Although this old man doesn't really like you, he's still your grandfather." Chu Tianlu felt extremely awkward when Lin Yi called his grandfather old man to his face. He could only pretend that he didn't hear it. He lowered his head and said, "I originally wanted to use the inner core as a gift, but after Chu Hengding snatched it away, I could only think of other ways. To be honest, the things I've prepared now are only about the same as what my cousins just gave me. With Chu Tianlu's identity as a direct descendant, it was already very degrading for him to give something about the same as a descendant from the side branches. Linny chuckled and said, "Then don't give it to me. Otherwise, your grandfather will be angry at you again." Without waiting for Chu Tianlu to speak, Lin Yi raised his chin in Chu Hengding's direction and said, "You should go and get the inner core back in a while. Since you prepared it, why should that old man benefit from it? Am I right?" Chu Tianlu said, "Solemnly, Senior Lin is right. Besides, the inner core still belongs to you. Before I give you the pill recipe, the inner core can't be considered mine. Don't worry, Senior Lin. I'm going to throw caution to the wind today. I'll definitely get the inner core back." Linny smiled faintly. He thought, if you can successfully get the inner core back, the sun will definitely rise from the west. No matter what, it was time to retract the clues he'd planted earlier. If everything went smoothly, not only would Chu Tianlu be able to wash away his grievances and regain his rightful position, he could also destroy Duan Muyu's marriage alliance. After a short while, Chu Hengding's youngest son, Chu Tianhao, appeared with an antique purple-red wooden box. He held his head high and chest out. "Grandson Chu Tianhao wishes Grandpa a long and boundless life and eternal happiness. This is a small token grandson has prepared for Grandpa. I hope Grandpa will like it." Chu Tianhao had an obedient look on his face. After he finished speaking, he firmly kowtowed 3 times. This was much more sincere than the branch family members from before. Chu Yuntian immediately laughed and said, "Good, good, good. You really are my good grandson. Hurry up and get up. Next time, don't knock so hard. Did it hurt?" Grandson's childish affection towards grandfather cannot be expressed without a heavy kowtow. I ask grandfather to understand this. Chu Tianhao's face was serious, as if he was speaking the truth. A cultivator at the peak of the late foundation establishment stage kowtowed 3 times and didn't even make a crack on the bricks on the ground. He actually has the nerve to say, "It's heavy." Duan Muyu, who was at the side, suddenly curled his lips and muttered. It just so happened that she was muttering right after Chu Tianhao finished speaking. Everyone in the hall was silent, waiting to see what Chu Tianhao would give Chu Yuntian. Thus, Duan Muyu's whisper was just loud enough for everyone to hear. After all, they were all cultivators, and having good hearing and sight was a basic quality. Chu Tianhao's pretty face immediately flushed red. He knew Duan Muyu, and as long as he could gain Chu Yuntian's favor, he was completely confident in marrying this beautiful woman. However, he hadn't expected that this woman he had coveted for so long would suddenly say something so sarcastic. It really put him on the spot. Chu Yuntian's smile also froze. Fortunately, Yi Qingcheng reacted quickly and immediately scolded, "Duan Muyu, what nonsense are you spouting? Hurry up and apologize to Senior Chu and young Master Tianhao." Duan Muyu snorted softly, her face full of reluctance. With her personality, she wouldn't do anything rude. However, when she thought about the possibility of marrying this pretty boy, Lin Yi's figure suddenly flashed through her mind. Thus, for some reason, she couldn't help but stab Chu Tianhao. With Yi Qingcheng's excuse, Chu Yuntian immediately laughed and waved his hand. It's fine. Sect Master Yi, don't be too serious. It's normal for young people to like to joke around. As old people, can't we see our descendants playing around in front of us?" The implication was that he had already regarded Duan Muyu as his own descendant. As for her rudeness, he wouldn't pursue it any further. Yi Qingcheng smiled knowingly. Senior Chu is indeed broad-minded. It's admirable. Oh, right, young Master Tianhao's birthday gift seems to be an extremely precious treasure. Hurry up and let us broaden our horizons. These two were both wily old foxes. With just a few words, they smoothed out the sudden situation. Yi Qingcheng complimented, and then took the opportunity to shift the topic to Chu Tianhao. There was no trace of deliberate intent. Chu Tianhao kindly said, "This little girl dares to not give me face. Wait until I marry her and see how I'll deal with her." Hearing Yi Qingcheng mention his gift, Chu Tianhao hurriedly put away the petty thoughts in his heart. Full of energy, he held the purple-red wooden box in a position parallel to his forehead. "Grandpa, this is the inner core of a nascent soul stage sea beast that I've collected with great effort. I hope it can help Grandpa refine a nascent soul golden core and reach a higher level." Chu Tianhao said proudly, and slowly opened the purple-red wooden box. A touch of faint blue light rose from the wooden box, and waves of pure spiritual power faintly emitted from the wooden box. There was a sudden gasp in the hall. There were many nascent soul stage old monsters present. This nascent soul stage, sea beast's inner core, was absolutely attractive to them. Chu Yuntian was also surprised and happy. He was happy that Chu Tianhao was able to find a nascent soul stage sea beast's inner core. Moreover, this inner core was the size of 2 fists. If it was used to refine a nascent soul golden core, it could be divided into at least 3 portions. If he found an alchemist to refine the inner core, 3 portions of materials could basically guarantee a pill. But he was surprised that Chu Tianhao actually took out a nascent soul stage sea beast's inner core. Didn't he know that there were more than 10 nascent soul stage old monsters here? Didn't he know that an ordinary man's wealth would cause him to get into trouble? Didn't he know that he was only the weakest early nascent soul stage? If someone tried to rob him, who would help him keep the inner core? Feeling the greedy gazes of the surrounding nascent soul stage old monsters, Chu Yuntian wished he could immediately put away the inner core. However, under the watchful eyes of so many people, doing so was a bit too unsightly. Moreover, what he wanted to see had already been seen, so there was no point in putting it away. "Grandpa, he's lying. This inner core was prepared by me for Grandpa." Just as Chu Yuntian was struggling between joy and worry in his heart, Chu Tianlu appeared out of nowhere and stood next to Chu Tianhao, glaring at him. To be continued. Chapter 5480. Chu Tianhao was startled, but his old man, Chu Hengding, had already warned him that Chu Tianlu might jump out to fight for it, so he was relatively calm right now. Sweeping a disdainful glance at Chu Tianlu at his side, Chu Tianhao said proudly, "Oh, I was wondering who it was. Isn't this my traitorous cousin? How did he kill my older brother? Now, you still want to steal the inner alchemy I prepared for my grandfather? You're spouting nonsense." The word traitor immediately provoked Chu Tianlu. His face instantly flushed red, and it was obvious just how agitated he was. After all, to someone who wholeheartedly cared about the clan, the reputation of a traitor was far too heavy. "I'm spouting nonsense. Is it me who's spouting nonsense, or is it you who's running amok? You and I both know." Chu Tianhao's face was full of righteousness, which really made others feel that there was something wrong with Chu Tianlu. Only they, the people involved, truly knew who was spouting nonsense. "Grandfather, this Niden really was something I obtained from 2 seniors. I was going to offer it to you as a birthday gift, but it was stolen by second uncle." Chu Tianlu didn't want to argue with Chu Tianhao, so he knelt straight in front of Chu Yuntian and spoke with a face full of grief and indignation. Lin Yi shook his head in secret. This kid really was stubborn. What was the point of doing this? However, Lin Yi already knew that there was no point in Chu Tianlu going out. He was only stirring up this pretext. Chu Hungding snorted coldly and said, "What a joke. Let's not talk about whether or not I would steal something from a junior like you. Tell me, what did you use to exchange for such a precious, nascent, soul sea beast's Sniden? Since you exchanged it, how could it have been stolen by me? Since it was stolen by me, why didn't you complain to the family head earlier? Why do you have to come out now and cause trouble?" It had to be said that Chu Hungding's words were quite incisive. The people around him couldn't help but nod. 8 out of 10 people believed that Chu Tianlu was just pestering them endlessly. There were also 2 people who just wanted to watch the show and didn't want things to get out of hand. They wanted nothing more than for Chu Tianlu to continue retorting. It would be best if the Chu clan directly had internal strife. That would be interesting. Chu Tianlu straightened his neck and said angrily, "Senior Lin handed the inner core to me first so that I could serve as proof and go to your place to exchange for a few pill recipes. In the end, not only did you seize my inner core, you didn't even give me a single pill recipe. Grandfather has been deceived by you these past few days. Even if I went to look for grandfather, I would definitely be obstructed by you. Ridiculous. I can tell that you're lying just by listening to your nonsense." Chu Hungding's face was full of disdain. He retorted mercilessly, "One moment you said that Senior Lin's inner core was only for you to use as proof, and the next moment you said that it was yours. You even said that for the sake of a few pill recipes, someone actually used a nascent soul inner core to exchange for pill recipes. And you actually dared to say that the family head was deceived by me? Is the family head really that muddle-headed in your eyes?" Seeing Chu Yuntian's face slowly darken, Chu Hungding was inwardly pleased. He deeply felt that he crushed Chu Tianlu in terms of intelligence. That was absolute power. Chu Tianlu grew anxious and blurted out, "Then what did you use to exchange for the inner core?" Chu Tianhao chuckled and said, "Traitor cousin, don't worry. The things my father and I used to exchange are definitely more valuable than the few pill recipes you spoke of, but you don't need to know about it." "Nonsense. Do you have any proof? This is clearly the inner core that you stole from me. I don't believe that you can find someone to exchange it for." Chu Tianlu felt his blood boil. His words were completely blurted out, and he didn't know whether or not they made sense. Chu Tianlu didn't consider that Chu Hungding was the person who controlled the entire Chu family's finances. How hard could it be to find a merchant association to admit that they sold the inner core to Chu Hungding? As expected, Chu Hungding had already prepared an excuse. With a condescending attitude, he laughed disdainfully and said, "Of course I can prove where the inner core came from. But you, how can you prove everything you've said? Or perhaps that Senior Lin of yours really did give you an inner core to exchange for something, but in the end, you took it for yourself and then framed us." Lin Yi laughed coldly. Sure enough, Chu Hungding was making a false accusation. He was probably trying to shut Lin Yi up. After all, Lin Yi did have some sort of background. Chu Tianlu was immediately speechless. If he wanted to prove where the inner core came from, he could only ask Lin Yi to step forward. But even if Lin Yi stepped forward, there was no proof that the inner core belonged to him. Since that was the case, dragging Lin Yi into this seemed to be meaningless. Chu Tianlu clenched his teeth and thought to himself, "I might as well take this on by myself." Suddenly, a bundle flew to Chu Tianlu's side. A sharp blade could be seen at the edge of the bundle. Then, Lin Yi sent him a sound transmission. "Use this to prove that the inner core is ours. When these things are placed together with the inner core, there will be a weak resonance." Chu Tianlu was immediately overjoyed. He immediately opened the bundle. It was the materials from the sea crab corpse that he had personally dissected. There was only a claw tip and a small piece of shell in the bundle, but it was enough to prove where the inner core came from. However, Chu Tianlu was a little puzzled. When did Lin Yi bring these things with him? When he returned to the Chu clan that day, these materials were all on Chu Tianlu's flying spirit beast. He did not have time to retrieve them, and they were then locked up. When Chu Tianlu regained his freedom, he went to look for these things again, but they were already nowhere to be found. No one knew where they had gone. All the materials were piled up. After all, it was a small mountain as tall as two people. Chu Tianlu even suspected that Chu Hengding had taken it for himself, but he had no way to verify it. In reality, Lin Yi had taken advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to turn these things into a primordial spirit and store them in the jade pendant space. They were all good materials for refining tools. It would be good to give them to the king of scrap later, lest Chu Hengding take advantage of them. This is the proof. You see this? This is a claw tip and a piece of shell from an early nascent soul sea crab. I personally dissected them after the two seniors killed the crab. They are of the same origin as the inner core. When placed together, there will be a weak resonance. You dare try it? Chu Tianlu suddenly stood up and approached Chu Tianlu with the materials from the sea crab. Chu Tianlu was shocked. He did not know if what Chu Tianlu said was true, but he clearly knew that the inner core truly belonged to Chu Tianlu. That was why he did not dare let Chu Tianlu try it. Chu Hengding's expression was rather unsightly. He did not know that the inner core had been obtained by Lin Yi and the others after they personally killed the sea crab. However, since Chu Tianlu had said this, it should not be wrong. He had already suffered a loss by not trusting an honest person like Chu Tianlu. It was better to trust him now. Chapter 54-81. Faced with the suddenly aggressive Chu Tianlu, Chu Hengding and his son fell into a rare silence. Chu Yuntian immediately felt that something was wrong. Although this old man was obstinate and self-opinionated at the same time, he was also extremely suspicious. When he trusted someone, he might not show anything, but once he became suspicious, everything would be overturned by him, and he would list everything as a target of suspicion. Now was the time for Chu Yuntian to become suspicious of Chu Hengding. Chu Yuntian had believed everything Chu Hengding had said, but now, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Heaven's Road, what exactly is going on? Tell me honestly. Chu Yuntian's expression was cold. He swept his gaze over Chu Hengding and the others and finally stopped on Chu Tianlu. He ordered in an unquestionable tone. Chu Tianlu immediately said respectfully, "When we left Taishi Island, two seniors, and I killed a sea crab on a small island." This time, Chu Tianlu was smart. He didn't say that Lin Yi had separated from the other two before coming to support them. He told the story of how Lin Yi had fought the sea crab with Bing Wuqing after he arrived. This made people think that the three of them had been together the entire time, and that they had encountered the sea crab together. Strictly speaking, Chu Tianlu was telling the truth. There was just a time difference. Whether or not people would misunderstand was not his problem. After Chu Tianlu finished speaking, Chu Yuntian didn't need to verify the resonance between the inner core and the materials to be sure that Chu Tianlu wasn't lying. Then, who was lying about Chu Tianliang? Chu Hengding's expression changed, but surprisingly, he didn't interrupt Chu Tianlu's narration. This surprised Lin Yi. Did Chu Hengding know that the situation was hopeless and gave up on struggling? Chu Yuntian coldly swept his gaze over Chu Hengding, then snorted and said to Chu Tianlu, "Tianlu, tell me again about you and Tianliang." Chu Yunting was taken aback. He hurriedly walked up and said in a low voice, "Family leader, should we discuss this in private later? After all, there are many distinguished guests here." If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't wash his dirty linen in public, Chu Yunting wouldn't have bothered to help Chu Hongding. Although he and Chu Hongding hadn't completely fallen out, they weren't far from it. Chu Yuntian narrowed his eyes and looked around. He forced a smile and said, "Fellow Taoists, Chu Yuntian has some family matters to deal with. Please excuse me if I have been rude." As he spoke, he cupped his hands and bowed. Then he waved his hand and released a barrier of vital energy that enveloped himself, Chu Hongding, Chu Tianlu, and the others. "It doesn't matter now, Heaven's Road. If you have something to say, just say it," Chu Yuntian said with a gloomy face. No matter what the final result was, he had already lost his face today. Chu Hongding sneered. "Chu Tianlu, since the family head has asked you to speak, then speak. I'd like to see what other lies you can weave. I'll tell you, I, Chu Tianlu, am a man of indomitable spirit. I never lie. Every word I say is the truth. I have a clear conscience," Chu Tianlu said boldly. He immediately recounted everything that had happened in full detail. This time, Chu Hongding didn't interrupt him at all. He allowed Chu Tianlu to recount everything in detail. Even Chu Tianlu was a little surprised. When Chu Tianlu said that Chu Tianliang had used the shape-shifting urn to turn Chu Wenshang into a scapegoat, Chu Yuntian's face darkened. He didn't feel sorry for Chu Wenshang, but for the shape-shifting urn. This was a one-time use treasure that could save his life at a critical moment. Yet Chu Tianliang had actually used it in private. As for the person who gave it to Chu Tianliang, it was obvious who it was. When Chu Yuntian heard that Chu Tianliang also had the murderous shadow shield, he immediately exploded. Fortunately, Chu Tianlu had been careful this time and didn't mention the divine sense fruit's core. He only said that he had been ambushed by Chu Tianliang while exploring. Otherwise, Chu Yuntian's attention would have been diverted by the divine sense fruit's core. "Chu Hongding, why don't you tell this old man what's going on? How could the shape-shifting urn and murderous shadow shield from the family's treasury appear in Chu Tianliang's hands?" Chu Yuntian was already on the verge of exploding. He stared at Chu Hongding with bloodshot eyes. This wasn't just because of the two treasures. No matter what, Chu Yuntian was still the head of the Chu family. Although these two consumable treasures were precious, they were not unbearable. What Chu Yuntian was truly angry about was that he had been played like a fool by Chu Hongding and his son. Anyone who was obstinate and self-opinionated was definitely an extremely arrogant existence. How could he tolerate the fact that he had been played like a monkey? Chu Hongding laughed loudly and said, "Family head, are you going to believe whatever Chu Tianlu says now? Are you going to punish me for my crimes just like that? You still dare to quibble?" Chu Yuntian roared. "Do you really think this old man has gone senile? We'll know whether or not Chu Tianlu is lying if we check the amount of shape-shifting urn and murderous shadow shield in the family treasury. Do you think he would tell such a clumsy lie? Or are you going to refuse to admit defeat until you see your coffin? Do you really want me to personally check what treasures are missing from the treasury?" Chu Hongding curled his lips and shrugged. He said nonchalantly, "It doesn't matter. If you have nothing better to do, you can go take a look if you want. However, I'm not afraid to tell you that I was the one who gave these things to Tianliang for him to use to save his life. So what? Tianliang is also your grandson. Can't a dignified young master of the Chu clan use these two disposable items? You actually admitted it. You actually dared to admit it just like that. Good. At least you're somewhat responsible." Chu Yuntian was greatly shocked, but he didn't think too much about it. Just as he said, if he wanted to prove whether or not Chu Tianlu was lying, it would be clear with a simple check. Chu Hongding had no way of denying it. "Men, detain that unfilial son, Chu Hungding. After the birthday feast, I'll personally deal with him. Chu Yuntian removed the barrier of true energy and pointed his sword at Chu Hungding. He ordered the Chu family to capture him. Ha 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 ha. Old thing, you really want to capture me? Chu Hungding laughed loudly. He didn't seem to realize that he was a traitor of the Chu family after being exposed. Instead, he arrogantly slapped Chu Yuntian's finger away and said, "Old fool, do you really think I'm afraid of you? I was giving you face before. If you had cooperated obediently and continued to feign ignorance, I could have let you be the patriarch for a few more days. Now that you want to capture me, we'll just go our separate ways. Either the fish dies, or the net splits." Chapter 54:82. Chu Yuntian was so angry that he laughed. True chi surged all over his body, revealing the strength of an early-stage, nascent soul cultivator. Evil creature, this old man has really raised a son like you for nothing. Come, 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 let this old man see just how strong this net of yours is. It can even kill this old man, a fish, without breaking. Early-stage, nascent soul. What's so great about that? Chu Hungding looked at Chu Yuntian with pity and mockery. As if I'm not an early-stage, nascent soul cultivator. With that, his aura soared. He was just as strong, just as violent, just as strong, early-stage, nascent soul cultivator. How is this possible? Chu Yuntian was shocked, and so was Chu Yunting. A few days ago, Chu Hungding had been at the peak of the mid-stage gold core realm. How could he have suddenly become an early-stage, nascent soul cultivator? Could one level up like this? Could one level up a day? Since when did cultivation become as fast as walking upstairs? Chu Yunting suddenly felt like he'd been living like a dog for the past few decades. What's going on? Chu Yunting and Chu Yuntian looked at each other. Unfortunately, the questions were all the same. No one knew the answer. Could it be that Chu Hungding had obtained several spirit knowledge fruits, golden cores, and nascent souls? That didn't make sense. In the entire hall, only Lin Yi had expected this. When he saw Chu Hungding erupt with early-stage, nascent soul strength, Lin Yi rubbed his chin thoughtfully. There was indeed something wrong. He hadn't been mistaken. The old man's unstable aura was indeed caused by a breakthrough, but he hadn't expected him to break through to early-stage, nascent soul so quickly. Other than Lin Yi himself, there was only one person who could do it, be it the common world, sky-class island, or this small world of the ancient times. The center, that damned center, had already raised its hands to the Chu clan. His movements were really fast. Old thing, you're no longer fit to be the clan master of the Chu clan. You should abdicate as soon as possible. I'm your son, after all. Why don't you let me hold this position for a few years? Chu Hungding chuckled. His original plan was to help his son become the young patriarch. Now that he was the patriarch, wouldn't his son be the young patriarch? Evil creature, I don't know what crooked method you use to raise your level, but you think you can contend against this old man? Today I'll show you what an experienced, early-stage, nascent soul cultivator is capable of. How could Chu Yuntian allow Chu Hungding to replace him in such a manner? He was about to attack and take care of this rebellious son. Both of them were at the early stage of the nascent soul realm. Chu Hungding had clearly just broken through, and his aura had not yet stabilized. Chu Yuntian had taken this into consideration and believed that he had an 80% chance of defeating Chu Hungding. Seeing that the two Yuanying stage old monsters of the Chu clan were having an internal conflict, the guests in the hall had already retreated to make room for them. What a joke! Although it was good to watch the show, it was better to watch the battle between two nascent soul old monsters from afar. With everyone retreating, most of the tables were empty. Only the table closest to Chu Hungding still had two hooded figures. Previously, Lin Yi hadn't paid much attention to these irrelevant people. Now that he looked closely, he realized that they were old acquaintances. The two of them slowly stood up and arrived next to Chu Hungding in a flash. They removed their hoods to reveal their true appearances. They were Xue Jianfeng and Yu Taicong. From the moment Lin Yi guessed that Chu Hungding's ascension had something to do with the center, he guessed that Chu Hungding still had some tricks up his sleeves. Thus, he wasn't surprised to see these two appear. Xue Jianfeng said arrogantly, "Old thing, you want to show Chu Hungding the foundation of an early-stage, nascent soul cultivator? Then let's see if this young master can make your mincemeat sink to the bottom of the sewers." As he spoke, Xue Jianfeng also circulated his own cultivation method. His incomparably tyrannical aura had actually reached the level of a perfected, nascent soul cultivator. Chu Yuntian's aura was immediately and thoroughly crushed. He forcibly retracted what he was about to do. Perfected nascent soul cultivator. Chu Yuntian's expression changed drastically. He never imagined that Chu Hungding would have a perfected nascent soul cultivator behind him. That was the pinnacle of combat power in the primordial underworld. Xue Jianfeng was extremely pleased. He didn't expect that he could reach perfected nascent soul so quickly after joining the center. In the current primordial underworld, there weren't many people who could be his match. Even if there were a few veteran perfected nascent soul cultivators, Xue Jianfeng didn't fear them in the slightest. Behind him was the center. By his side, there were mass-produced perfected nascent soul cultivators, such as Yu Taicong. "Elder Yu, come and show off your skills, lest this old thing doesn't know how powerful you are." Seeing Chu Yuntian trembling in fear before him, Xue Jianfeng's vanity was greatly satisfied. Thus, he wanted to drag Yu Taicong along to enjoy this feeling. Yu Taicong joined the center in order to increase his strength. Now that his dream had come true, wouldn't it be like returning home in glory if he didn't show off? Thus, he smiled and nodded, completely releasing his perfected nascent soul aura. Another perfected nascent soul cultivator. Chu Yuntian completely lost his courage. Facing an early nascent soul cultivator, Chu Yuntian still had some confidence in defeating him, but facing a perfected nascent soul cultivator, Xue Jianfeng, Chu Yuntian simply had no intention of resisting. Now that there was an additional Yu Taicong, the fact that he didn't kneel on the spot was already a display of Chu Yuntian's willpower. "Seniors, this is our Chu clan's matter. Why must you forcefully interfere? Although Senior's strength is astonishing, aren't you afraid of giving others the wrong impression?" Chu Yuntian's body didn't dare to resist, but his mouth still made a final struggle. "Give others the wrong impression? I'm so scared. If I give others the wrong impression, won't I be surrounded and attacked? That's too scary. When the time comes, I have to prepare a few more sets of clothes. Otherwise, if I kill too many people and get covered in blood, I won't have enough to change into." Xue Jianfeng first made a fearful expression, then changed the topic and began to laugh wildly. Chu Yuntian was both shocked and furious, but there was nothing he could do. With Xue Jianfeng's perfected nascent soul strength, he could do as he pleased in the ancient martial world. Unless he was surrounded and attacked by cultivators of the same level, ordinary cultivators would die no matter how many came. They simply weren't enough for him to kill. Chapter 54-83. Chu Yuntian smiled bitterly and sighed softly. "I understand. From today onwards, I, Chu Yuntian, will abdicate and become the Chu family's supreme elder. Chu Hungding will take over as the family head, effective immediately. To tell the truth, Chu Yuntian's emotions were complicated. He'd been forced to abdicate by his son and outsiders. He'd been utterly humiliated. However, when he saw Chu Hengding's allies, it was clear that he wasn't wrong. In his hands, the Chu family truly had a chance to rise. Half gratified and half sorrowful, Chu Yuntian glanced at Chu Hengding. This was his own son. Although he was talented, his heart wasn't in the right place, and his actions were too radical. If he could steadily develop the Chu family with him, it wasn't impossible for the Chu family to rise. As for now, it seemed like the Chu family would rise even faster in the short term. However, it was hard to say what would happen in the future. When Chu Hengding heard Chu Yuntian's announcement, he beamed with joy. He'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Hadn't he been planning for this moment all along? Since I, Chu Hengding, have taken over as the family head, the first thing I'll do is clean up the family. That traitor Chu Tianlu misled the masses with his lies, harmed his brothers, stole the family's treasures, colluded with outsiders, and so on. His crimes are too numerous to count and cannot be forgiven. Drag him out and kill him immediately. Chu Hengding pointed at Chu Tianlu in high spirits and loudly declared his crimes. The descendants of the Chu family didn't dare to object. Even the family head, Chu Yuntian, had been forced to abdicate by Chu Hengding. If they disobeyed Chu Hengding's orders now, they knew what would happen to them. Two early Golden Core Chu family disciples quickly walked towards Chu Tianlu, ready to drag him out and kill him. Chu Hengding suddenly waved his hand. Wait, let him watch from the side. Otherwise, he won't be able to die in peace. After stopping the two Chu family disciples, Chu Hengding smiled at Chu Tianhao and said, Tianhao, let your father arrange a marriage for you. If it weren't for that traitor's mental issues, this marriage would have been his. Chu Tianlu didn't pay any attention to Chu Hengding's smug look. He was thinking about how he could turn defeat into victory. No matter how he thought about it, he didn't think there was any other way besides Lin Yi. As for whether Lin Yi would be able to turn the situation around, it was hard to guarantee. Sect Master Yi Qingcheng, shall we settle the marriage we agreed on before? My son, Chu Tian, is a direct descendant of the Chu clan. He'll be the heir to the Chu clan in the future. There shouldn't be any problems with your sex, Duan Muyu, right? With Chu Hengding's current strength, the alliance with the Leaf Spirit sect was no longer important. But no one knew a son better than a father. Chu Hengding was well aware of Chu Tianhao's desire for Duan Muyu, so the marriage had to continue. Yi Qingcheng hurriedly pulled Duan Muyu in and said, No problem, no problem. Speaking of which, young Master Tianhao is really talented. Our Xiaoyu is climbing up the social ladder. Since Patriarch Chu doesn't mind our Xiaoyu's clumsy little girl, then let's settle it like this. There's no time like the present. Let's get engaged today. Lin Yi frowned slightly and sent a telepathic message to Bing Wuqing. Wuqing, go and protect Chu Tianlu first, lest he accidentally dies. Yes, Boss Lin Yi. Bing Wuqing nodded in agreement. She stood up, parted the crowd in front of her, and walked over boldly. Chu Tianlu is someone I, Bing Wuqing, brought back. Kill him? Who dares? Bing Wuqing's body emitted wisps of coldness. With every step she took, frost rapidly spread from the soles of her feet, forming a thin layer of ice on the ground. Although the aura of a peak early nascent soul cultivator wasn't as strong as that of Xue Jianfeng, and Yu Taicong, it was more condensed and sharp. It seemed to be able to break through Xue Jianfeng and Yu Taicong's perfected nascent soul aura. Bing Wuqing. Xue Jianfeng was overjoyed. He hadn't heard Chu Hengding mention that Bing Wuqing was here. Otherwise, he would have gone to find trouble with her long ago. All this while, Xue Jianfeng hadn't been able to gain any advantage from Bing Wuqing. Now, that Xue Jianfeng was a top-notch nascent soul expert. How could he not seek revenge on Xue Jianfeng? Chu Hengding actually wanted to talk to Xue Jianfeng about Bing Wuqing. After all, Xue Jianfeng and Yu Taitsong were both from the Snow Sword faction. He was wondering if the three of them had some sort of connection. However, he had been really busy these few days, and he had to set aside some time for the center to improve his strength. After a while, he didn't have the chance to meet Xue Jianfeng and Yu Taitsong, which was why he had been delayed. That's great. I've been looking for you, but I couldn't find you. So, you've been hiding here. Xue Jianfeng smiled proudly. Chu Tianlu is one of your men? Then I really can't kill him. I have to torture him and make him wish he was dead. Bing Wuqing glanced at Xue Jianfeng coldly and said indifferently, "You can try." "I'll try." The corner of Xue Jianfeng's mouth curled up. He was about to make a move to torture Chu Tianlu. However, before he could move, he realized that the air around him was filled with countless tiny black ice crystals. The temperature was dropping, and even the air seemed to be freezing. This is the merciless ice style. Xue Jianfeng looked at the thin black ice on his body in disbelief. He couldn't understand why the merciless ice style, which was clearly useless, had suddenly become so strange and domineering. Just the evolved version of the merciless ice style was enough to threaten Xue Jianfeng's safety. Therefore, Xue Jianfeng didn't dare to take any more risks. He hurriedly called out, "Elder Yu, this Bing Wuqing is a little strange. Let's work together and finish her off quickly." Yu Taitsong nodded. "All right, you attack from the front, and I'll support from the side." Xue Jianfeng almost vomited blood. If he could threaten her with a direct attack, why would he need Yu Taitsong's help? But no matter what, there were two nascent soul perfection experts. If they attacked Bing Wuqing at the same time, no matter how powerful his new merciless ice style was, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. All of a sudden, an indifferent voice rang out beside Xue Jianfeng. "You've really forgotten the pain now that you've recovered. Why don't you learn from your mistakes? You're really a fool who doesn't learn from your mistakes. Do you want me to continue teaching you a lesson?" Xue Jianfeng shuddered subconsciously. This voice was too frightening, and it had practically left a shadow in his heart. He turned around stiffly. Who else could it be but Lin Yi? Chapter 5484. No, I'm a consummate nascent soul expert, and there's no one more powerful than me in the entire immemorial martial world. What's a mere Lin Yi? Lin Yi looked at Xue Jianfeng mockingly and said, "It's not easy for you to know about a stalker, but Wuqing and I have been living here for a few days, and if we're talking about a stalker, it seems you're the one." Chu Hengding pointed at Lin Yi and said, "This brat isn't any good either, and he's a little strange. Let's attack together and kill both of them." Xue Jianfeng subconsciously shrunk his neck. Although he was cheering himself on, his intuition told him that it was better to stay as far away from Chu Hengding as possible when facing Lin Yi, lest he got caught in the crossfire. As expected, Lin Yi didn't even need to do anything. Bing Wuqing had already appeared beside Chu Hengding without batting an eyelid. She reached out and grabbed Chu Hengding's outstretched finger and said, "My boss hates it when people point at him, so I guess you don't need this piece of trash anymore. Then say goodbye to him properly." Before she finished speaking, there were two cracking sounds. Chu Hengding's outstretched finger was completely broken by Bing Wuqing. The fingers were connected to the heart, so Chu Hengding immediately screamed in agony, and the people around him couldn't help but shiver. He was merely an early-stage nascent soul expert who had relied on the central drug to advance, and hadn't even stabilized his strength. So how could he be a match for Bing Wuching, who was at the peak of the early-stage nascent soul realm? If Lin Yi hadn't given the order, Bing Wuching could have easily killed him. Chu Hongding's finger was broken and pointed at his own nose. Unable to bear the pain, he fell to his knees and screamed in agony. "Bing Wuching, how dare you!" Yu Taitsong shouted and charged forward. Unlike Xue Jianfeng, he hadn't suffered a great loss at Lin Yi's hands. Although he was a little wary of Lin Yi, he had, after all, reached the consummate nascent soul realm that he had dreamed of. Seeing that Chu Hongding was at a disadvantage, he immediately tried to save him. Bing Wuching snorted coldly. She had no intention of backing down, even if Yu Taitsong's abilities were several levels higher than hers. Tiny black ice crystals instantly filled the hall, and the power of the merciless ice force completely erupted. Even the air was filled with the faint sound of ice condensing. Yu Taitsong's expression changed slightly, but he still smiled faintly and said, "Made some progress. Truly well-deserving of being our snow sword sex genius. However, aren't you being a little rude in front of me, a grand elder?" Before he could finish his sentence, Yu Taitsong's right wrist shook, and a ray of white light exploded. Within the light, an almost transparent sword blade pierced toward Bing Wuching like a venomous snake flicking its tongue. The swordsmanship of the Snow Sword sect was definitely not just for show. Especially after Yu Taitsong pulled out the Snow Sword sect's ice-shattering sword, its power had increased a few notches. Even the upgraded merciless ice force could only be torn apart by the ice-shattering sword. Bing Wuching's pupils shrank slightly, and black ice spikes appeared out of thin air in both of her palms. The black ice spike in her left hand swept out in front of her with all her might in an attempt to fend off Yu Taitsong's ice-shattering sword. However, the black ice spike in her right hand was ruthlessly flung out by Bing Wuching, and it appeared in front of Yu Taitsong's chest as if it had teleported. Putting aside the fact that Yu Taitsong only had the power of a nascent soul-perfected stage, even if he had broken through to the Mystic Ascension stage, he would definitely be severely injured if Bing Wuching's black ice spike pierced his heart. However, Yu Taitsong was after all a nascent soul-perfected stage old monster who had made a name for himself a long time ago. He was different from Xue Jianfeng, who had forcefully advanced from the foundation establishment stage to the nascent soul-perfected stage. After all, he had the foundation of a nascent soul middle stage, and his strength after the advancement was the most stable in comparison. Faced with Bing Wuching's lethal black icicles, Yu Taitsong did not even bat an eyelid. The ice-shattering sword merely spun slightly, and a pulling force was generated on the blade, pulling the black icicles that had just brushed past the sword. In this way, the direction of the black ice spike was completely different. Not only did it avoid Yu Taitsong's heart, it could not even hit his body. As for the black ice spike that Bing Wuching's left hand had swept horizontally to block, it had missed its target as the ice-shattering sword rotated. A ferocious smile appeared on Yu Taitsong's face. To be able to kill a genius with his own hands, especially a genius from his own sect, it felt pretty good. Bing Wuching was still expressionless. Even though the aura of death had completely engulfed him, it did not faze this iceberg-like man in the slightest. The tip of the ice-shattering sword, which was shining with a dazzling light, was almost kissing his throat. Even if Bing Wuching wanted to retreat, there was nowhere for her to do so. Moreover, Lin Yi was behind her. At this moment, the first reaction of Bing Wuching, who had always prided herself on being calm, cold, and rational as ice, was that she could not dodge, or else she would endanger Lin Yi. Bing Wuching's subconscious reaction was to dodge, but she only gave a slight jerk before she firmly stopped. Lin Yi, who was behind her, instantly understood what Bing Wuching was thinking. Regardless of whether Bing Wuching was sincere or just doing it subconsciously, Lin Yi was grateful for her kindness. Besides, she could not really let anything happen to Bing Wuching in front of Lin Yi. At the same time that the ice-shattering sword shone brightly, Lin Yi was actually already prepared to strike. Soul Hook. In the face of Bing Wuching's fatal crisis, Lin Yi did not hesitate to use the Soul Hook instead of the consciousness vortex that he had yet to thoroughly study, because he was worried that Bing Wuching would be at a disadvantage in Yu Taizong's hands. Bing Wuching was almost ready to accept the cold feeling of the ice-shattering sword piercing her throat, but she was not the type to close her eyes and wait for death. Even if she was going to die, she would definitely try her best to drag someone down with her. So in that instant, the black ice spike in her left hand was also flung out. Her target was not Yu Taizong's body, but the other black ice spike that had been diverted by the ice-shattering sword. In just a short moment, the situation had taken a series of twists and turns. From Yu Taizong's strike, to Bing Wuching's counterattack, to Yu Taizong's continuous attacks, and almost killing Bing Wuching, to Bing Wuching's dying counterattack, to Lin Yi's intervention, everything had happened almost at the same time. Outside the hall, those below the nascent soul stage did not even have the chance to clearly see the movements of these people. As for the nascent soul experts, they could only roughly see it. Of course, no one could clearly see Lin Yi's soul hook. Only Yu Taizong himself knew exactly what kind of attack he had suffered, but he did not have the chance to say it. Chapter 54-85. In a battle between experts, how could there be a single flaw? Bing Wuching would naturally not let go of such an opportunity to turn the tables in a situation that was supposed to be certain death. Although she did not know that it was caused by Lin Yi's soul-reaping hand, Bing Wuching immediately reached out to grab the thin blade of the shattered ice sword and wrapped it in black ice. At the same time, the black icicle that Bing Wuching had counterattacked with before her death cleverly struck the black icicle that had been deviating from its original course. With a soft sound of impact, the two black icicles changed directions slightly. The black icicle from before adjusted its course again, still aiming for Yu Taizong's heart. As for the black icicle behind it, it turned around and flew downwards, aiming directly at Chu Hongding, who was kneeling on the ground and screaming in pain. If it had succeeded, Bing Wuching's final attack would have resulted in a double kill. To be honest, even Bing Wuching herself did not expect that her final attack would have such a precise effect. This was merely the most ideal situation that existed in her heart. Just as Chu Hongding was about to lose his life to the black icicle, another snow-white longsword stabbed diagonally and deflected the lethal black icicle. At the same time, the black icicle sped up again and knocked away the other icicle that had been aimed at Yu Taizong. If Bing Wuching had fallen just like that, and her final attack had been countered in such a manner, surely she would have been extremely dissatisfied. Fortunately, he was completely unscathed and had even managed to snatch Yu Taizong's shattered ice sword with inexplicable ease. Seeing Yu Taizong fall flat on his back on the ground, and the shattered ice sword in his hand falling into Bing Wuching's hand, everyone was dumbfounded at the sight, especially Chu Hongding, who had just escaped death. He was still wondering if Yu Taizong had been so frightened by the black icicle that his heart had stopped beating. Otherwise, the icicle would have touched him. Speaking of which, this Bing Wuching was really frightening. She almost scared me to death. Only Xue Jianfeng, who had saved Chu Hongding, looked as if he had eaten **T. He was cursing himself for being an idiot. How could he show off his abilities when Lin Yi was around? Why did he suddenly rush over like an idiot? Yu Taizong's death from falling was obviously due to Lin Yi's secret attack. It was all because of that idiot Yu Taizong. Xue Jianfeng had seen that Yu Taitsong was bullying Bing Wuqing, so he had wanted to join forces with Yu Taitsong to get rid of Bing Wuqing before Lin Yi could react. However, he had not expected the situation to change so quickly. He had only been slightly slower, but he did not even have the chance to intervene in the battle. He could only subconsciously save Chu Hongding's life. If possible, Xue Jianfeng felt that he should immediately return the favor of saving his life, lest he offended Lin Yi. The corners of Lin Yi's mouth curled into a playful smile. He clapped his hands lightly and said, "Good sword! What a good sword!" Xue Jianfeng revealed an awkward smile and said, "Boss Lin Yi really has a good eye. This is one of the 3 best swords in the Snow Sword School. If Boss Lin Yi likes it, you can take it and play with it." After he finished speaking, Xue Jianfeng respectfully held the sword with both hands and lowered his head to present it to Lin Yi. "Oh, you heard wrong. I did not say that the sword is good, but that you are a cheap person," Lin Yi said indifferently. He casually took the sword from Xue Jianfeng's hand and lightly flicked the blade. Hearing the crisp sound of the sword, he nodded and said, "Since you are so sincere, and this sword is not bad, I will reluctantly accept it." "What the hell? Don't be like this, okay?" Xue Jianfeng wanted to cry, but no tears came out. "After all this time, you are saying that I am a cheap person? And I even rushed to present the sword to you. So cheap. Speaking of which, can you not force yourself? Why don't you return it to me? Don't think that I will let it go just because you gave me a sword. Were you trying to ruin my business just now?" Lin Yi did not look at Xue Jianfeng, but only stared at the snow-white blade and lightly stroked it as he spoke indifferently. Xue Jianfeng's expression turned serious. With a putong sound, he instantly knelt on the ground and said in an extremely sincere tone, "Boss Lin Yi, I was wrong this time. This junior has just advanced to the nascent Soul Paragon stage, and I wanted to try out a move with my cheap hands. I have no evil intentions. Of course, this junior's strength is nothing in senior's eyes. Please don't kill this junior, okay?" Lin Yi did not expect Xue Jianfeng to be so decisive, directly kneeling down just like that. This immediately made him think of a fellow who had been entangled with him from the secular world all the way to the Heaven Stage Island. After not seeing him for a long time, he was starting to miss Kong Mingming. When he returned to the Heaven Stage Island, he would definitely teach him a good lesson first. Seeing the expectant look in Xue Jianfeng's eyes, Lin Yi pinched his chin and looked up at the ceiling at a 45-degree angle. He said, "That chews something just now." He kowtowed so hard, but the green bricks on the ground did not break. "Looks like they are quite thick. The quality of these bricks is not bad. I wonder where you bought them." Without saying a word, Xue Jianfeng directly kowtowed 3 times. Then, without changing his expression, he said with a smile, "Boss Lin Yi, these green bricks are actually very sturdy. They only broke when I used so much force. If you like them, I can help you buy some." Bing Wuqing glanced at Xue Jianfeng and slightly turned her head away expressionlessly, as if she did not know him at all. This was such a disgrace to the Snow Sword School. Unfortunately, Xue Jianfeng happened to see Bing Wuqing's expression. This silent disdain from his sworn enemy almost made Xue Jianfeng spit out blood. He thought to himself, "Bing Wuqing, just you wait. I finally know you. I don't believe that Lin Yi will always follow you. When you're alone, you'll see how I'll deal with you." Chu Hongding, who was sitting paralyzed on the ground, was completely dumbfounded. He hugged his broken finger and even forgot to cry out in pain. Everything had happened too quickly in such a short period of time. He needed some time to sort it out. 2 nascent soul cultivators at the peak of the early stage and Chu Hongding, who was at the early stage of the nascent soul realm, had to deal with a nascent soul cultivator at the peak of the early stage and a foundation establishment cultivator at the peak of the early stage. Chu Hongding, who was at the early stage of the nascent soul realm, did not do anything, but the two nascent soul cultivators at the peak of the early stage were already lying flat on the ground and kneeling down. He, who was at the early stage of the nascent soul realm, was still fine. He did not lie flat on the ground or kneel down. He just sat paralyzed on the ground with a broken finger. What on earth was going on? However, Chu Hongding was not stupid. On the contrary, he was quite intelligent. At least, he could tell that the current situation seemed to be led by Lin Yi. Chapter 5486. As he spoke, Chu Hongding secretly looked at Xue Jianfeng in disdain. He thought to himself, this spineless guy. He's a consummate nascent soul expert, kneeling down so easily. He's not even as good as me. At least I didn't kneel. Lin Yi turned to look at Chu Hongding and said with a faint smile, who's meddling in your Chu family's affairs? You're obviously meddling in my own affairs. Let's talk about my crab's inner core first. Inner core? Chu Hongding really wanted to slap himself a few times. How could he have forgotten about this? He had always thought that the inner core was his. He had told so many lies that even he himself had believed them. Even though Chu Qianlu had already proven that the inner core wasn't his, he still hadn't changed his mind. After all, he had two consummate nascent soul experts and one early-stage nascent soul expert. Chu Hongding felt that everything was under his control. How could he still think that something that was in his hands wouldn't be his? If he'd known this would happen, he would have used the elixir recipe to trade for it. And none of this would have happened. Chu Hongding was depressed, but Lin Yi couldn't be bothered with him. The inner core was just an excuse. Who would really care about it? He handed the sword to Bing Wuqing and said, this sword isn't bad. There's ice soul on it. You can have it. Thank you, Boss Lin Yi. Xue Jianfeng showed a rare smile. The ice soul sword was one of the 3 famous swords of the Snow Sword School, and so was the Shattered Ice Sword. However, the Ice Soul Sword was more suitable for Bing Wuqing. By the way, Boss Lin Yi, this Shattered Ice Sword is very suitable for Cold's Shattered Ice physique. Do you want me to bring it back to her, or do you want to give it to her next time? With the Ice Soul Sword, the Ice Shattering Sword was naturally useless. Bing Wuqing was also very thoughtful, and immediately thought of Lung Lung's ice-shattering physique. After all, in Bing Wuqing's eyes, Lung Lung was not only Lin Yi's woman, but also a member of the Snow Sword faction. Lin Yi waved his hand nonchalantly and said, if it suits Cold, I'll bring it to her. I don't know when I'll be able to go find her. After that, Lin Yi said to Chu Hongding, hey, what do you say? Chu Hongding braced himself and said, yes, the inner core is yours, so you can interfere. But Bing Wuqing isn't the owner of the inner core, right? He shouldn't interfere in our Chu clan's affairs, right? Bing Wuqing cast a glance at Yu Taitsong and Xue Jianfeng, who were lying and kneeling on the ground, and said coldly, I'm from the Snow Sword faction. It meant that Yu Taitsong and Xue Jianfeng were both from the Snow Sword School. Since they had interfered, as members of the Snow Sword School, they had to get involved to the end. Chu Hongding didn't know what to say. He could tell that Bing Wuqing didn't talk much, but when she did, she wasn't easy to deal with either. The phrase concise and shocking was used to describe people like Bing Wuqing. Chu Yuntian sighed softly. No matter what, today was his birthday, and this was the Chu clan's territory. Chu Hongding's forced abdication was despicable, but Chu Hongding's predicament was equivalent to a slap in the face for the Chu clan. Therefore, as the former clan leader, he had no choice but to step forward and clean up the mess. Everyone, today is my birthday. It's rare that so many distinguished guests are willing to do me the honor. Why don't you take a seat and continue with the banquet?" Chu Yuntian politely bowed to Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng, then invited the people outside the hall. As for the mess in the hall caused by the short battle earlier, Chu Yuntian completely ignored it. The people outside the hall immediately said politely, "No, no, we've already eaten our fill. We'll take our leave now." Although they hadn't eaten much of the food, they had seen the grand internal strife within the clan, the drama of the abdication, and the chaotic battle between the nascent soul experts. No matter what, it was worth the price of the ticket. The only question was, how did Yu Taitsong end up so suddenly? It was obvious that Bing Wuqing was about to be defeated, but suddenly there was a shocking reversal. Apart from Xue Jianfeng, no one else present could tell what was going on. Now that the other party was obviously going to settle the clan's affairs, were they really not going to be sensible enough to go in and set up the overturned tables and chairs and continue to pick up the bowls and continue eating? "Please forgive me if I've neglected you." Chu Yuntian forced a smile and greeted them one by one. It was only after he had sent off most of the people that his face darkened. Apart from the Chu clan, the only ones left behind were Lin Yi, Bing Wuqing, Xue Jianfeng, Yu Taitsong, and Yi Qingcheng and Duan Muyu from Yiling's sect. Lin Yi smiled at Duan Muyu and gave her a look, indicating for her to continue watching the show. Then he turned to Chu Yuntian and said, "All right, I'll hold a meeting for you, now to discuss the issue of the Chu clan's traitor." As soon as the words left his mouth, Lin Yi suddenly felt that the scene was somewhat familiar, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Meanwhile, Duan Muyu and Yi Qingcheng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Wasn't this what Lin Yi had said in Yiling's sect last time? It was just that Yiling's sect had changed to Chu clan. Lin Yi felt that it was somewhat familiar. It was probably because Yi Qingcheng and Duan Muyu were beside him. Traitor? Who are you calling a traitor? Before Chu Yuntian could speak, Chu Hengding immediately jumped up. If there was a traitor, it was naturally him, Chu Hengding. It couldn't be Chu Tianlu, could it? Seeing how forceful Lin Yi was, if his identity as a traitor was confirmed, he didn't need to think to know what would happen. Thus, Chu Hengding had to fight for it. This was also why he had always thought that Yu Taitsong had acted on his own. Regardless of whether he had been scared to death or suddenly had an illness, it wasn't Lin Yi who had done it. If Chu Hengding and Xue Jianfeng understood this, they probably wouldn't dare to jump out and refute it. Lin Yi laughed coldly and mocked mercilessly. "Do you think that apart from you, who has only been the clan head for a few minutes, there's someone else worthy of the glorious title of traitor? You're talking nonsense. I, Chu Hengding, am wholeheartedly working for the Chu clan. I'm upright and have a clear conscience." Chu Hengding was truly a skilled actor. His expression was quite on point. Lin Yi pointed at Xue Jianfeng and said, "Since you've sided with Xue Jianfeng, you're naturally a traitor. Are you still going to deny it?" Yi Qingcheng's expression was strange. He felt as if he had fallen into a memory. "Xue Jianfeng, why don't you tell us? What's going on with this Chu Hengding?" Lin Yi couldn't be bothered to waste words with Chu Hengding. There was a ready-made Xue Jianfeng kneeling beside him. It would be a waste not to drag him out. Xue Jianfeng's cheeks were streaming with tears. "You finally remember that I'm kneeling here? Can't you let me stand up first?" You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.